November 3, 2003 Observer Newsletter Career of Road Warrior Hawk, Hogan/TNA, more by Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter November 3, 2003. When Mike Hextran was really living it up as Road Warrior Hawk in 1985, and a friend made a comment on how fast he was living, his response was, "I'll never live to see 40 anyway." Sometimes when you're 28, you think like that. Unfortunately for him, when he did make 40, and had already had his share of health problems, his thoughts were much different. After a heart attack 3 years ago, he found religion. While he was hardly perfect, friends believe he was sincere, even if his reputation among independent promoters was hardly the best. He always had a Bible in his bag when he went on road trips. Unfortunately, he may have made the decision too late. It will be several weeks, or perhaps months, before toxicology reports come back and there is an official cause of death for Hextran, who passed away on October 18 at the age of 46. He died in his sleep, probably shortly after going to bed that night, after spending most of the day packing to move the next day from his condo in Indian Shores, Florida, into his new house in Tampa. Coroner Bill Pellin suggested that the death may be from something other than natural causes. Hextran's heart attack during the summer of 2000 was caused by cardiomyopathy, which is a disease that inflames the heart. It has been linked to steroids, enlarged hearts and sudden heart attack deaths among weightlifters and other athletes using steroids. Both Louis Mucciolo, Louis Spicolli, and Brian Pillman, both of whom used steroids and growth hormone before their death, were found to have had similar heart problems at the time of their death. The disease was found in medical patients using anabolic steroids in far lower doses than athletes for prescribed non-athletic treatment of diseases. Perhaps steroids had nothing to do with his death, or even his health problems, but the combination of admitted heavy use, as well as heart problems, kidney problems and liver problems at a young age looks suspicious to say the least. During the 80s, when steroids were considered the big secret, from a public standpoint, Hextran always denied use. That's just how it was. In the 90s, when denying use would be tantamount to insulting people's intelligence, he admitted use, but also said that he didn't believe they were that dangerous and always denied any link to his health problems, even though friends as far back as 1985 remember a very different private belief. He was publicly furious back in 1992 to the point of going on radio and arguing the point against the company public posturing at the time, when WWF instituted steroid testing. Before long, was gone from the promotion, and the glory days of the Road Warriors were over. But Hextran did enough other stuff, that to blame steroids alone may very well be unfair, and will give those who want to deny that it had anything to do with it enough ammunition. Certainly, Hawk was a more prolific user at his peak than most. But to believe they definitely had nothing to do with it could very well be the ultimate of all the pro wrestling deceptions. Like Andre the Giant, Hawk's career was the Faustian bargain. But in the case of Andre, it was out of his hands. Hawk, hardly alone among wrestlers of the 80s, played what has turned out to be the scariest roulette game of all. And he was at first among the luckiest, and at the end, among the unluckiest. At the end of the day, one has to ask the question, was it worth it? I can only surmise by how he attempted to change his life over the past few years, that if he was still alive, he'd say no. Hawk was one of the biggest stars, most charismatic and highest paid wrestlers up to that point in history when he hit his peak during the late 1980s. The Road Warriors were so successful as a team that almost nobody argues their placing as, in their prime, the most successful tag team on a worldwide basis in the history of the industry. They had the look, the aura, and a unique interview ability, with Animal screaming whatever points were supposed to be made, and yelling, "Tell 'em Hawk." Hawk would finish the promo with his twisted-sounding voice that every wrestling fan of the era tried to imitate, spewing catchphrases like, "We snack on danger, and dine on death, that's good for us, very bad for you, and of course, oh, what a rush." While many heavy steroid and recreational drug users will live long lives, many have their numbers called early. And now, out of the high school class of 1976 in his Minneapolis area school district, of the 5 men who became known pro wrestlers, Curt Hennig, Rick Rude, both of whom died from drug-related causes and had heart damage, Dean Peters, Brady Boone, who died in an auto accident while working as a ref for WCW in 1998, and Tom Zenk of Robbinsdale High and Hextran of Patrick Henry High. Only Zenk is alive today. Hennig and Hextran go way back, all the way to a bowling alley in 1975 when the two had a fight as part of a rumble between Henry High and Robbinsdale High. Both claim they won. Years later, when Hennig was in the AWA working with the Road Warriors, who were much bigger than he was at the time and selling almost nothing for him, he once joked on a television show that if I knew how big he was going to become, I never would have punched him. Hextran didn't like Hennig at first. He watched wrestling and thought Hennig was a cocky jock from a rival high school who walked around like he was a big deal because his father was TV wrestling star Larry Hennig. That first meeting was very different from what would happen 25 years later. Then, after a serious heart attack, suffered after a match on August 5, 2000, in Derwent, Australia on a tour for Superstars of Wrestling, when Hextran was in the hospital in far-off Australia, Hennig, who was on the tour, stayed with him in the country for 10 more days until he was able to return to the States. Then, in February, when Hennig died, Hextran was freaked out about it, telling friends one day he just didn't wake up and appeared scared it would happen to him. Hextran was a huge wrestling and Elvis fan growing up. Like all the Minneapolis-based guys who grew up in the gyms and wanted to be TV wrestlers, his hero in high school was superstar Billy Graham, who he ended up being close friends with in the latter stages of his life. Perhaps the biggest of the Graham marks at the time was Jim Janos, now Jesse Ventura, who was 6 years older than Hextran. Janos even went to the local bars and would pretend to be Graham's younger brother. In fact, that's how he first picked up his wife Terry, while he was working as a bouncer, and she was a big wrestling fan. By the time Hextran was in his early 20s, Ventura was a local wrestling star. Hextran started training at the old Jesse Ventura gym in Minneapolis, and approached Ventura about getting into pro wrestling. Ventura told him flat out, "You'll never make it." Hextran repeated that story many times, never losing the bitterness. Once in the early 90s, while causing a scene smoking at the Met Center, he joked when one of the local newspapers reported that the guy causing the scene was Ventura, at the time mayor of Brooklyn Park, who was furious, since he didn't smoke cigarettes, and was a political and talk show celebrity at the time. But Ventura did tell Hextran about Eddie Sharkey. At the time, Hextran was bouncing at a club called Grandma B's in North Minneapolis alongside Rick Rude, Barry Darsow, and Joe Laurinaitis. It was the toughest joint in town, said Eddie Scheiman, better known as Sharkey, a former area wrestler who had become disenchanted with the entire business. One time Hawk beat up a guy in front so bad and left him on the pavement in bad shape. A few minutes later, in front of the bar, somebody got run over. An ambulance came after being called about the guy being run over, and when it got there, they picked up the guy Hawk beat up and left the guy who was run over, since he looked in worse shape. Sharkey was a junior heavyweight prelim wrestler in the 60s. His wrestling career ended in the late 60s. Because of his size, he was not a major star, with his highest profile matches coming when world junior heavyweight champion Danny Hodge would come to the area, and Sharkey would put him over in title matches. Sharkey claimed that promoter Vern Gagne was hitting on his wife, Dixie Jordan, that two are since divorced, who wrestled as Princess Little Cloud. Sharkey went to Gagne's Minneapolis boxing and wrestling club office at the Dickman Hotel in Minneapolis with a gun, and started firing shots everywhere. Needless to say, in a business where blackballing was common, shooting up a promoter's office appeared to be a spectacular way to end one's career. During the 70s, he trained wrestlers in Minneapolis, which was a hotbed, which only infuriated Gagne more, since he believed only he had the right to promote wrestling or break people from the area into the business. While few ever made it, two became major stars, Bob Backlund and Ventura. In 1982, pro wrestling was on fire in Minneapolis, largely due to the success of Hulkamania, a few years before Vince McMahon claimed to have created it. The wrestlers in the AWA had a great lifestyle. Most of the stars were making $75,000 to low six figures, working 10 to 15 dates per month, with plenty of free time. Years earlier, Nick Bockwinkel turned down an opportunity for the NWA title because the lifestyle in the AWA was so good, and things at that point were the best they would ever be. For big tough guys like Hextran, Rude, Laurinaitis, and Darsow, it seemed like a fun way to make big money. Hextran wanted it the most of the four. They would have turned to Gagne, but he was only interested in teaching people who were worthy in his eyes, which meant either second-generation guys, or guys with real wrestling or major sports backgrounds. Sharkey told the guys he was through with wrestling and wasn't interested. Hextran went back to Ventura and told him Sharkey wasn't interested, and Ventura said, "Give him some money and he'll be interested." He was right. But ultimately there was going to be a problem. Gagne still hated Sharkey, and anyone he trained would not be accepted into his closed fraternity. While Backlund and Ventura ended up working the AWA, both had made names for themselves as stars elsewhere. Backlund, who was a college wrestling champion, which meant a lot to Gagne, in Amarillo. Ventura, who was a great talker and a knockoff on Graham, Gagne's most successful heel of the 70s, had worked on top in Oregon. And Ventura had to kayfabe his Sharkey start for a long time. After 3 months of training, Sharkey sent Hextran to Vancouver to work for Al Tomko in a territory on its ass as the German powerhouse, Crusher von Hague. It lasted only 2 weeks before he decided being away from home for no money wasn't really as much fun as he thought. He quit and returned to Minneapolis. At about the same time Hextran quit, Alan Ole Anderson Rogovsky, who was booking for Georgia Championship Wrestling, went out one night and saw the movie The Road Warrior. Sharkey had invited Anderson to Minneapolis to see his big students. He was already looking for a wrestler to play the role. Anderson picked Laurinaitis, because he was the strongest looking of the four. Laurinaitis was put on Georgia Championship Wrestling, and at first, put over like a new monster on TV, but it was clear he was way too green. He was sent to Jim Crockett Promotions after about a week, and told to drop the gimmick because he needed ring time. He worked there a nondescript Joe Lauren, television jobber in motorcycle rider shorts. Within a few weeks, he also quit and came home. Right after that, Anderson had taken over the promotion from Jim Barnett, blaming Barnett for getting the company deep in debt with his spending. Anderson cut back on big-name wrestlers and national stars, and was looking to go with cheaper headliners. In trying to work on the business end, the booking went to hell. The company hadn't even had tag team champions for about 6 months after a fight, and Sika left the territory. There was talk of a fictitious tournament for the national tag team titles, which Anderson was grooming for Matt Bourne and Arnold Anderson, no relation, although the two looked alike, and Anderson worked at various times as Ola's brother, cousin and nephew. Managed by Paul Ellering. Ellering was a former powerlifting champion from Melrose, Minnesota, who could deadlift 745 pounds. He got his first career push as a dark-haired babyface in the AWA, feuding with Ventura in deadlift contests. He got over far more than he should have, given a weak babyface personality and little wrestling ability, largely because Ventura was such a great talker, and gave him the nickname, Ellerod. But he learned from Ventura the art of talking people into the stands. He went to Mid-South Wrestling doing the pumped-up superstar Graham routine, with the tie-dyed trunks and rhyming interviews. While he had the body, he was short, and still wasn't good in the ring. But the body impressed people in those days. But before he made it, he blew out his knee badly, and his career looked to be over. He was a nice guy and was learning how to cut a decent promo, so Anderson gave him a job as a manager. Bourne was then arrested the week before they were going to announce them as new champions. Anderson flew back to Minnesota. Sharkey suggested Rude and Hextran, but when Anderson got there, he said, you, pointing to Hextran and Laurinaitis, you start this week. You, pointing to Rude and Darsow. You start in another week or two. Rude and Darsow did, but without nearly the same push, although both eventually made it as stars. Ole went back to the name the Road Warriors. Hextran and Laurinaitis showed up at the old TBS studios on Techwood Drive on June 11, 1983, with Ellering as their manager, came out to the song Iron Man by Black Sabbath, and were announced as having just won the tournament for the belts. While at first Ellering was put with them simply because Anderson liked Ellering and wanted to keep him having a job, Ellering had some financial acumen, and became the real-life manager of the guys as they started making big money almost immediately, and he invested it well. They were an instant sensation. Wrestling fans had never seen guys who looked as physically dangerous, and played the part, selling nothing, eating people alive, and working short explosive bouts. They bought into Zubaz early on, a company that manufactured stretch pants that became a part of late 80s culture as NFL players, wrestlers, big weightlifters, and eventually the general public liked them because of how comfortable they were, even though it ended up being a style fad that went out of vogue after a few years. Ellering called his Hill stable, which also included Jake Roberts and King Kong Bundy at the time, the Legion of Doom, a moniker that stuck with the Road Warriors the rest of their career. Bill Watts came up with the idea of the face paint. Anderson came up with the idea of doing the explosive squash matches and no selling, to hide how green they were. At the arena shows, he put them in top matches with his best workers, and always had the Road Warriors win in 5 minutes or less, even against all-time area legends like Mr. Wrestling I, which turned out to be his last pro match on August 14, 1983 at the Omni, and Jack and Jerry Briscoe. The idea, designed to protect fans from seeing how limited they were, worked to perfection, as fans simply thought they were so strong and powerful that even the legends of wrestling couldn't last 5 minutes with them. The wrestling magazines, which had major influence on the business in those days, fell in love with them, and they were on covers everywhere. The After mags protected them, as in their first year, they often lost to the arena shows. But those results would be changed when the magazines reported on them. The stories were told, exaggerating the lifts they could do. Animal was very strong, able to bench more than 500 pounds, although not as strong as Warlord, while Hawk was not nearly as strong, but looked freaky, being cut up at 275 pounds, which not a lot of guys in those days were. Between the spiked shoulder pads they wore to the ring, the face paint, the music, ferocity, and Hawk's ability to flex his neck and snap dog collars, it was one of the great acts in wrestling history. When they would work with the top guys, they pioneered the no-sell spots. The top guys would give them what were finishing moves at the time, like suplexes and piledrivers, and they would pop right up. Hawk usually took the piledrivers because his traps were positively freaky and were used as the gimmick as to why piledrivers were ineffective against him. They became the hottest act in the Georgia circuit, but that promotion was having its problems. But when they went for outside dates with other major offices around North America, they were big box office from their TBS squash matches and magazine covers. The problems with the Road Warriors were evident quickly. Tommy Rich had been the top star on TBS a few years earlier. While he had burned out, he was still a major star. It was natural that he, with various partners, would face the Road Warriors on top. But when Rich's offense was ineffective against the new monsters, he was never thought of the same. It was a pattern that promoters didn't see, because at first, the Road Warriors drew, and even when they didn't, the crowd would go crazy for their short matches from start to finish like few others in the business, and they were only rookies. Nobody since Andre the Giant had made such an impact on wrestling that quickly. Eventually they turned Bundy babyface for a feud, with various partners, with the Road Warriors. Their most frequent opponents were the Sawyer brothers. To show how screwed up the booking was by this point, over the week after Thanksgiving of 1983, the Sawyer brothers beat the Road Warriors every night of the week on a tour of Ohio and Michigan. Then, on TBS that Saturday, the Warriors came out with the belts and nothing was acknowledged. Then, the week after Christmas, they went to many of those same cities, and every night, had the Sawyers win again. To make things confusing, on TBS that Saturday, the Sawyers came out with the belts, although they didn't acknowledge which of the cities was the title change. Buzz Sawyer was fired, and without a change in the ring, the Warriors had the belts back on the January 28, 1984 television show. Another title change took place on May 6, 1984, at the Omni, where they lost to Bundy and Masked Superstar, Bill Eadie, who later became WWF rivals as half of Demolition. Superstar started a Japan tour right after the match, known well in advance. So it was announced Superstar was injured and the belts were vacant. This led to a tournament on May 20, 1984, Omni, where they beat Junkyard Dog and Sweet Brown Sugar, Skip Young, in the finals. The Georgia office was falling apart, and Vince McMahon Jr. purchased controlling interest in 1984. The Warriors were making good money working out dates in the various NWA groups, while getting their exposure in Atlanta. It was clear Georgia was going to die, so they moved on, dropping the tag titles to Ron Garvin and Jerry Oates in Oates' hometown of Columbus, Georgia on July 4, 1984. It was the last clean job they would do for years. The AWA, on fire like never before 6 months earlier due to Hogan, was reeling. Hogan, Ventura, David Schultz, Gene Okerlund, most of the production staff and nearly everyone else were all leaving for greener pastures, mostly the national expansion of Vince McMahon's WWF. The Warriors were billed from Chicago, which was Gagne's top city, and they really were from Minneapolis, Gagne's home city. They were already huge stars, so it was only natural they would be brought in to fill the void. The deal wasn't so easy, as they showed their own power. As a stipulation for coming in, they wanted Sharkey hired as a referee and trainer. Due to the success of his original group, as well as Nikita Koloff, who was injured when the original group trained and mainly watched, but with almost no training because of his look, was brought into Crockett Promotions and made an instant superstar by Dusty Rhodes, Sharkey garnered a rep as being a trainer of champions. Most of his protégés actually weren't all that good, but they looked great to fans who equated great body equals great wrestler and real-life tough guy. And in the 80s, juiced-up monsters were still something of a novelty. Gagne agreed to it, and while business with people like the Warriors, Sergeant Slaughter, Jerry Blackwell and Bruiser Brody as headliners never reached the Hogan years, at first the territory was holding up fairly well. Sharkey, who now divides his time between the Philippines and Minneapolis, was thankful that the Road Warriors remembered him and got him the job, and noted how Hawk would many times take him out to steak dinners in appreciation and give advice to his students. But he's had second thoughts of late about his role in bringing Hawk and Rude into pro wrestling with all the drug problems the business brought to them. Like with Hogan a few years earlier, Gagne booked them as heels, but the fans cheered them wildly. With Hogan, the crowd wouldn't boo his face opponents, but would cheer Hogan more, and Gagne did the turn almost immediately. Gagne had a harder time with the fans cheering the Warriors, and spent nearly a year searching for babyfaces who could get the fans' cheers before finally giving up. Instead, the Warriors managed to turn Vern's babyfaces into impotent heels. Old-time legends like the Crusher, Baron von Raschke, and Dick the Bruiser, while long past their prime, were still seen as tough guys by fans who longed for time to stand still and remember them as they were, and still paid to see them. As the Warriors beat the Crusher and the Baron for the belts right away, on August 25, 1984 in Las Vegas at the Showboat, and no-sold their offense, not running away from the Baron's feared claw. When Baron stuck up his hand, opponents sold it like a deadly Hogan finger point or Lawler pulling down the strap in Memphis. They became feeble old men, and their drawing power that had lasted decades was no more. The same happened when they defended the title against the greatest team in AWA history, Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens, treating both legends as old men. Gagne's best babyface tag team, the High Flyers, consisting of Vern's 190-pound son Greg and partner Jim Brunzell, were booed as the Warriors no-sold for them, and rowdy fans laughed at the size difference. Ditto the father and son team of Kurt and Larry Hennig, although the Warriors did sell for Larry, who, even past 40 and with a bad neck, was respected by everyone as a 300-plus pound tough guy, particularly since he knocked them around one night when they weren't selling for him and Jerry Blackwell. The Fabulous Ones, Stan Lane and Steve Kieran, who were the hottest babyface tag team in the country at one point, were brought in, and had a natural feud over the tag titles. Between getting booed out of the arenas and having to work with bigger, stronger guys who weren't all that cooperative and who got way too excited when the crowd went wild for them, which happened almost every night, they quit the promotion. Reluctantly, Gagne turned the Warriors face, or more accurately, simply booked them as faces, bringing in another legendary team, the Fabulous Freebirds, from Texas, as their foes. The feud did good business, although not as good as most had expected, and the Freebirds hated working in the Midwest, so it was short-lived. Probably their biggest and perhaps best AWA match was September 28, 1985, outdoors at Comiskey Park, where they beat Terry Gordy and Michael Hayes via DQ to keep their AWA tag team before 21,000 fans, paying $280,000. While there were numerous big matches on the show, including Stan Hansen versus Rick Martell for the AWA title, the house was clearly drawn by the Warriors Freebirds and Ric Flair versus Magnum TA for the NWA title. At the same time, they were becoming instant legends in Japan. TV Tokyo every Monday night 8 p.m. in that era aired a show called World Pro Wrestling, airing an hour of tapes from all over North America, and on occasion, Mexico. The show focused itself on talent that had a name in Japan, and was built around the Road Warriors, Brody, Flair, the Von Erichs, and the Freebirds. Because of the time slot on a network, the show had a huge audience and did high ratings for a few years. A lot of its weekly audience were young people who weren't necessarily fans of Japanese wrestling, and made a lot of new fans. To the new fans, the Warriors became the biggest stars on the show because to a non-fan, they were the easiest to understand. Their matches, mostly 2-minute squashes and slightly longer but still short arena matches against the bigger stars, were easier to understand because it was simple power moves with fast pacing, no slow spots and no psychology. They looked the part of tough guys more than anyone else. Fans who didn't know the first thing about US wrestling, and didn't have the patience for the longer Japanese matches, loved them. Understanding their popularity, Ellering negotiated a deal where he, and both Hawk and Animal, signed a $10,000 per week contract with Giant Baba, which, in 1985, was as big a money contract as anyone was getting. Without even having wrestled there, they were making the kind of money that Brody, Stan Hansen, the Funks and Andre the Giant were making after years of making a name for themselves. Baba ran his first show after the opening of the current Sumo Hall on March 9, 1985, with a major spectacular that sold out the 11,500-seat arena well in advance, headlined by the Road Warriors, who debuted the previous night, challenging Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu for the international tag team titles in a 2-out-of-3 fall match. Hawk destroyed Tsuruta to win the first fall. In the second fall, they did a fluke double pin deal where Tsuruta got his shoulder up, and Hawk was pinned. He got right up and they attacked the ref for a DQ. Most hardcore fans realized the match wasn't any good, and the Warriors, when not doing squashes, weren't all that great. But they were so over at the time, the fans loved it anyway. Baba quickly figured out how to use them. He would bring them in several times per year, but only for a few days at a time. He knew to keep their matches short, and always put them over. As attractions, the Warriors drew sellout crowds almost every night in the smaller cities. They worked with just about every wrestler in Japan, but Baba particularly liked putting them in with Riki Choshu, his hottest star, usually partnered with Killer Khan or Animal Hamaguchi, who would be there to sell, set up a hot tag where the Warriors would bump for Choshu's lariat, and eventually, Choshu's partner would do a job for a power slam, or the double impact, known in the US as the Doomsday Device. Hamaguchi was a great bump taker, while Khan, who was bigger than they were, allowed them to press slam him, which got over huge. Even when they wrestled the Funks, they went over in less than 4 minutes. Their second international tag title challenge, on June 2, 1986, at Budokan, this time against Choshu and Yoshiaki Yatsu, saw them DQ'd in 6:34. To the fans in Japan, the three top tag teams in the world were Choshu and Yatsu, Road Warriors and Tsuruta and Tenryu, who faced each other regularly in all combinations, usually with no winner. It was noted how much better the Choshu and Yatsu vs Tsuruta and Tenryu matches were than when the Warriors faced either team. But it didn't matter, because the Warriors were every bit as popular as the Japanese superstars. Baba was also smart enough to never allow them to be exposed, and kept them out of his annual year-end tag team tournaments, because it would require at some point for them to do jobs. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. On an early tour, one of the Japanese prelim wrestlers tied one of them up in a wrestling hold, stopping the momentum of their one-sided explosive matches. They went to Baba afterwards and told him to either send them home or that they were going to go in the ring the next night and fight for real. Baba calmed them down, told his guys to work with them, and there were never any major problems. Hawk's death got incredible press coverage in Japan. Weekly Pro Wrestling this past week, to great expense, stopped production of its magazine on October 19 when it got the news, and changed the cover from a shot of Kazushi Sakuraba to a 1988 Road Warriors photo with the NWA tag titles. The Next Americana magazine, a quarterly publication covering mainly WWE and major US indies, also changed covers as it was going to print. Every major promotion in Japan, and numerous independent shows in the US, did 10 bell salutes to Hawk before matches. Both Raw and SmackDown did video features. While the AWA was their base, they were working basically every major show that any NWA promoters could put together. Probably the only place they didn't work was for World Class, because Fritz von Erich likely recognized that at the time, Road Warriors vs Von Erichs would be huge money, but the long-term cost wouldn't be worth it. If the Road Warriors wouldn't sell enough for his kids, it would do more harm than good in the long run, and by that time, there was no way to get the Warriors to do a job for his kids. Plus, Fritz noted at the time that while they would draw, they would also make it cool for local biker types to boo his sons, and he didn't want that happening. Their biggest money program was probably in Crockett's territory, where the Warriors became American heroes against the hated Russians, which ironically consisted of fellow Minneapolis trainees Darso as Crusher Khrushchev and Scott Simpson. Simpson as Nikita Koloff, billed as a bitter Russian Olympic team member who would have won a gold medal in both wrestling and weightlifting. If you're going to write fiction, you might as well go all the way, except Russia boycotted the 1984 Olympics because they were in Los Angeles. He was billed as the nephew of wrestling's top Russian act of the previous 2 decades, now Uncle Ivan Koloff. While fans clamored for seeing the 4 big guys, it was Uncle Ivan, now in his mid-40s, who actually kept the matches together as he took most of the bumps and when needed, did all of the jobs. The Warriors and Russians went all over North America as strong underneath help on shows headlined by Flair as Crockett gained strength, surpassing world-class AWA and Mid-South Wrestling as the alternative promotion for those who didn't like Vince McMahon. In 1986, while in the AWA as faces, and with no heels left to conquer, they approached Brody in his hotel room. The dream feud at the time was Warriors vs Brody and Stan Hansen, who was the AWA champion at the time. It never happened in Japan because, and this was not coincidental, the Warriors' second night in Japan turned out to be Brody's last night with All Japan. Realizing they were hotter than he was, plus earning the same as him, he refused to cooperate in an undercard match with Choshu and Yatsu, stiffing the hell out of them. He showed up a few days later, challenging Antonio Inoki on a New Japan show, playing his cards perfectly, as now he was back as hot as they were. The Warriors were excited about the potential of such a feud, or a feud with Brody and protege John Knorr, who was another Minneapolis guy, and the biggest of them all, who they knew, but Brody turned it down flat. He said that it wouldn't work. They didn't understand why. Brody liked Hawk, but felt they didn't understand he wasn't going to play their game, and if their game wasn't played, it would end up a disappointment to everyone and all would be hurt. If they sold too much, their aura would be dead. But if they didn't sell for him, his aura would be dead. Brody worked with them at least once, most notable being on a major Don Owen show in Portland. Brody's partner may have been local star Rip Oliver, but whomever it was ended up doing the job. They had dropped the AWA tag belts with a ton of interference, To Jimmy Garvin and Steve Regal on September 29, 1985, in St. Paul, largely to free them to work more dates for Crockett, but they continued to work big shows there. But Crockett and Baba were paying better, and without a program with Brody, they had no opponents left. In 1986, with no opponents left and the territory hitting the skids, they left, and the AWA never recovered. The Road Warriors vs. Russians was a strong program for much of 1985 and 1986, not just for Crockett, but all over North America for various NWA promoters. Seeing how popular it was, Rhodes, the Crockett booker, who was getting a little long in the tooth and fans were starting to turn on him, hooked himself with the Warriors, and with his ability to entertain, the Warriors on his side guaranteed he wouldn't be booed. And it made sense. After all, there were 3 Russians, even if Dusty didn't exactly look right standing next to the other 2. Donning face paint, they feuded with the Russians over the NWA World 6-man tag team titles Rhodes created for his new program. At the first annual Crockett Cup, an afternoon and evening show which saw 24 tag teams from all over the world come to New Orleans on April 19, 1986, on a show jointly promoted by Mid-South Wrestling and Crockett, the Warriors were the big stars of the night. They went through Wahoo McDaniel and Mark Youngblood, the Midnight Express of Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, and Ronnie Garvin and Magnum TA in the finals. Because they were so hot an act, there was talk of breaking them up. Most felt Hawk had more potential as a single, and there was a thought at this time that Hawk could end up being, after Hulk Hogan, the hottest singles babyface in wrestling. But when tried out, the magic wasn't there. There was something missing when they tried both men out as singles on some big Crockett shows in 1986. During the 1986 Great America Bash Tour, both got singles title matches with Flair. They did the classic Dusty finish, which was killing the company, where they would pin Flair after a ref bump and a second ref came in, to apparently win the title, and get the big pop, only to have it overturned when the first ref, usually Tommy Young, would note that before the pin, he saw the Road Warrior throw Flair over the top rope. Flair vs. Hawk on July 1, 1986, in Philadelphia outdoors at Veterans Memorial Stadium drew a little over 10,000 fans, which was a slight disappointment, even if the $238,000 gate was an all-time record for the city. Flair's match with Animal 8 days later at Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati was a total disaster, only drawing 5,000. The idea of breaking them up was put on hold for several years after that. Flair and Hawk only had one more famous match on January 24, 1988, at the Nassau Coliseum, where Flair saved his title by using a chair, which Hawk no-sold, for the DQ on a pay-per-view debacle, destroyed by McMahon putting the first National Royal Rumble on free television head-to-head, and only drew 6,200 fans live. Starrcade 86 was the biggest money non-WWF pro wrestling show in history up to that point, called the Night of the Skywalkers. It was built around the Road Warriors vs. Midnight Express in a scaffold match. The match was built up for months. But about a month before the match, while wrestling in Japan, Hawk suffered a broken ankle in a tag match when he was out of position and got his leg tangled as Chasha went to give him a back suplex. Of course, the injury was never acknowledged in the US, and Animal and Ellering worked arena dates for weeks that Hawk was advertised on. However, broken ankle and all, he did go up the scaffold at the Omni in Atlanta, and took some risks of big falls, which drew the biggest live gate, $280,000, up to that point in the history of the city. Hawk, in particular, had a well-known temper and a short fuse. Bill Watts wrote that he was a huge drug abuser in those days, taking massive amounts of steroids, growth hormone, uppers and downers. Personality-wise, it was apparent, he said. Their personalities were so extremely mercurial, off the charts at times, the roid rages were really unstable, and sometimes very difficult to deal with. Hawk once told me when he was shooting straight monkey hormones, at that time, shooting hormones from rhesus monkeys was an in thing about those in the physique community, that the first thing each morning when he awoke, he wanted to kill someone. What a life. While there were wrestlers who shied away from fans, and others who loved the action as much as possible, the road managers with Crockett used to warn fans asking Hawk for autographs. Sometimes he'd oblige and be the nicest guy, but at the wrong time, he would hit fans, just because he was wound so tight. In wrestling, he broke the nose of Ken Lucas, a veteran Southern star who was brought into job for the Warriors at a Pro Wrestling USA taping. He didn't like Lucas taking some offense, and punched him in the nose, and it led to Lucas getting out of the business. He was in many other somewhat famous skirmishes, the most publicized being with Randy Savage. The first took place in Japan, when Savage made either some comments about Hawk's wife Dale, who Savage knew before she met Hawk. It was Hulk Hogan who introduced Hawk to his wife, who Hogan met when she was working at a gym, or they were arguing over a slice of pizza. Either way, Hawk decked Savage. Years later, Savage got retribution at a Kid Rock concert, throwing a sucker punch to Hawk and knocking him silly. Although worse, Savage's girlfriend Stephanie Bellers and another woman beat the hell out of Dale. Hawk claims Savage suckered him, didn't knock him out, but people got between them when he was going to retaliate, and he contemplated filing civil charges against them for the beating his wife took. He was once cut up by a knife-wielding Iranian at a Tokyo nightclub. Hawk also sucker-punched Eddie Guerrero in Japan in 1994 when they were in an argument over who was the better tag team, the Hellraisers or Los Gringos Locos. Hawk was beaten up on the New Japan bus by Charles Skaggs, Too Cold Scorpio, which resulted in Skaggs, who was a prelim guy, losing his job. Even though Hawk had go to the fight, because in the hierarchy, prelim guys aren't supposed to be beating up superstars. Because of his size and ability to portray ferocity, most fans believed Hawk to be one of the toughest men in the business. While he was no longer a major star, the image was ended when he suffered a broken nose in a Brawl for All match on television against Darren Drozdov in 1998, where both men looked like they were huge strong guys who didn't know the first thing about actual fighting. His reputation in Japan for the most part was just the opposite. He was the nicest guy, said Fumi Saito, who was one of his best friends in the country. He was like Terry Funk or Hulk Hogan. They were such big stars that they didn't need to push how big stars they were. He loved to go out in Japan and socialize with people, and party hard. Unlike most American wrestlers who don't really like Japan, it became almost a second home to him. In the 90s, when he went more frequently, he enjoyed it even more because it was largely devoid of the stressful politics of the U.S. companies. Outside wrestling, his life was stormy until recent years after his marriage to Dale. His first marriage in the 80s was a disaster. He dated numerous women in between, the most high-profile being Eleanor Mondale, the daughter of the former Vice President Walter Mondale, under Jimmy Carter, in the early 90s. In fact, Hawk and Walter Mondale socialized a decent amount, because when Hawk was working full-time for New Japan as half of the Hellraisers, and Mondale was the U.S. ambassador to Japan from 1993-97 during the Clinton administration. He even dated Missy Hyatt in 1993, which caused him a lot of ribbing from wrestlers because of her reputation. He would defend her, and the double standard of the wrestlers, noting she'd been with a lot of guys, but he'd been with plenty of women, so what was the difference? But they had a nasty breakup, not all that long before Hogan introduced him to his second wife. In 1987, the Road Warriors lit Chicago on fire, pacing Crockett Promotions to 7 straight sellouts at the UIC Pavilion in their adopted hometown. At the same time, they began negotiating with McMahon. Most considered them Crockett's most valuable act, with the possible exception of Flair. They were also wrestling the best matches of their career, because they were mainly working with the best working heels in the business, like the Horsemen and Midnight Express. In order to keep them, Crockett made an unheard of offer at the time, offering both Hawk and Animal $500,000 per year, which was Japanese level money at the time, plus Ellering got $275,000, even more unheard of since Ellering really wasn't a very good pro wrestling manager and the babyface manager role in wrestling was almost useless. Crockett was planning on making millions with quarterly pay-per-view events, and when those events didn't generate the money he expected, he fell deeply into debt. McMahon, who didn't offer them a guaranteed deal, didn't take losing the negotiations well, and created his own team in the image of the Warriors, called Demolition, consisting of Edie and Darsow. Eventually, McMahon also signed the Powers of Pain, Warlord, and Barbarian, a bigger, stronger, but less talented and far less charismatic version of the Road Warriors, who they were feuding with in Crockett Promotions. Although Powers of Pain were never big draws with anyone else, they had a program that did surprisingly well stemming from a much-hyped bench press contest, which saw them attack Animal when he was under 500 pounds. In the ensuing brawl, Animal legitimately suffered a broken orbital bone and had to come back wearing a hockey mask. It was the first time anyone had seen the Road Warriors gain revenge for an injury, so it worked. They were building to a series of scaffold matches, but Warlord and Barbarian opted out because they knew they were losing, and at their size, were afraid they'd blow out their knees taking those bumps every night, just as Jim Cornette had at the Night of the Skywalkers. So the Powers of Pain went to WWF, and at first, got huge pops when they showed up in Road Warrior outfits with the same haircuts and face paint, as fans who didn't follow Crockett thought it was the Warriors, just under a new name. The Warriors were part of the crew that introduced the War Games on July 4, 1987, at the Omni, drawing 13,500 fans, paying $250,000 as the Warriors and Nikita, now a babyface, and Rhodes and Ellering beat the Four Horsemen, Flair and Arnold Anderson and Blanchard and Lex Luger. and manager J.J. Dillon in a match where Dillon legitimately destroyed his shoulder, taking the Warriors' Doomsday Device finisher. While the move looks scary, with many of what appeared to be sick landings, with the exception of that move on Dillon, and a decade later a broken neck to Mark Canterbury Henry Godwin, the move didn't result in a lot of serious injuries. The War Games' success led to numerous sellouts around the U.S., with the Warriors on one side and the Horsemen on the other in War Games matches, which became the hottest new gimmick introduced in years. The Chicago sellout streak led to Starrcade being moved out of Greensboro, its traditional home, on November 26, 1987. The Warriors were to challenge Tully Blanchard and Arnold Anderson for the elusive NWA Tag titles they had yet to win. The fans were banking on a title change, and when they did another dusty finish, it killed the city dead for the promotion, as Chicago never drew well for the company again for about 10 years. Even the famous February 20, 1989, Flair-Ricky Steamboat title change only drew, which included Warriors beating Williams and Kevin Sullivan in an NWA Tag title defense, only drew 5,111 paid, and had to be papered heavily to make the building look good for pay-per-view. The Warriors finally won the NWA International Tag Team titles from Tsuruta and Tenryu in a one-fall match, via count-out on March 12, 1987, at Budokan Hall. They retained it over Tsuruta and Hiroshi Wajima via count-out on June 9, 1987, at Budokan Hall. On October 30, 1987, they went to a double count-out, keeping the belts, against Choshu and Yatsu. To show the level of negotiations it took for them to drop the titles on June 10, 1988 at Budokan Hall in a match to unify the World and International Tag belts as the double tag title that still exists today, consider this scenario. First, the night before the big match, the scheduled card was changed to a non-title match where World Tag Champs Tsuruta and Yatsu lost cleanly to the Warriors when Animal pinned Yatsu. Then, before 11,800 fans the next night on a show with no undercard, they used an Americanized finish in the unification match. Ref Joe Higuchi was knocked out of the ring by Hawk. A second ref came in as they double-teamed and pinned Tsuruta. However, Higuchi overruled the pin, and instead DQ'd the Warriors, and since titles in those days changed hands via DQ, that is how they lost the International Tag titles. They finally won the NWA belts on October 29, 1988, in New Orleans, from Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane, in a double-turn match. Blanchard and Anderson had recently quit the promotion and joined WWF, and Rhodes figured the Warriors could fill the void as the heel tag champs, and have a new program with Sting and Lex Luger, as well as give him new opponents. But while the double turn was almost flawlessly executed, just as before, the fans wouldn't boo the Warriors. Worse, the company was dying at this point and on the verge of being sold, and Warriors versus Sting and Luger was a disappointment at the gate. A deal was made with All Japan, where Tenryu would replace Rhodes on their six-man championship team, and the belts would be recognized and defended in both companies, legitimizing them as world titles. The deal ended up destroying the Crockett/All Japan relationship for good and put All Japan into its isolationist policy. The turn was given up on in February. At a live Clash of the Champions special in Cleveland on February 15, 1989, the Warriors and Tenryu were scheduled to face Sting and Junkyard Dog and Michael Hayes, that would also be taped for airing on NTV in Japan. As they were doing a backstage interview with Sting's team, Kevin Sullivan locked them in the dressing room. The change was made because the TBS hierarchy had decreed Sting to be the new rising star and were scared to death of him getting booed on live television. Instead, heels Sullivan and Mike Rotunda and Steve Williams came out and had a match. Sting and company were eventually unlocked, although it took them forever to hit the ring, and the show ended. It was impossible for Giant Baba, who ran wrestling with the idea it was a legit sport, to explain a match not taking place because a dressing room door was locked, particularly one that was going to air on his television. He didn't want anything more to do with American promotions, and the deal fell apart. The team suffered its first pinfall loss in nearly 4 years on April 2, 1989, when it came time to drop the NWA Tag titles to Williams and Rotunda on a live Clash in New Orleans. The finish was ref Teddy Long turning heel and refusing to count as the Warriors had the match won, and then fast counting Hawk when Williams got him from behind. The next year, with their contracts expiring, business was down and they weren't nearly the hot acts they were in 1987. With 6 months left on their deal, Jim Herd, who was running WCW at the time, offered them $156,000 apiece for a new deal. To say they were insulted would be putting it mildly. Given the finances at the time and that their drawing power was no longer there, a pay cut was going to have to be necessary, although it would have been difficult for the Warriors to understand it at the time. Herd also wanted them to break up the team and start wrestling against each other, feeling it was the one angle left that hadn't been done. Feuding with each other sounded great without thinking, but with any serious thought, it was insane. Fans didn't want to see it and they would kill their aura when one would job, which no doubt would have been Hawk, since he was almost always the one who would agree since Animal had always had more problems with being asked to lose. Worse, Herd didn't realize what a disappointment it had been a few years earlier when they experimented with them in some singles matches. They asked out of their contract early to go to WWF. In most cases he wouldn't give up such a well-known act to the opposition in the middle of a wrestling war when they were under contract, but Herd felt relieved to get out from under the weight of the $1.275 million per year deal for the act he inherited from Crockett. So it was off to WWF, which was the beginning of the end. First, McMahon didn't want Ellering. When Ellering saw he was getting in the way of making a deal, he stepped down voluntarily, and that ended the association. Second, because the two had trademarked the Road Warriors name as a wrestling team when they got hot, McMahon didn't want it. He instead called them the Legion of Doom. They were used to calling their own shots and being treated as something special. McMahon always put them over, but it was at the tag team title level, so they didn't work with the top people, and didn't make the money they were used to making. But they were considered such a hot act that McMahon brought them in, and immediately put them over his creation's Demolition, in a feud that was disappointing at the gate. While the team was very popular, it was not the hot act it had been a few years earlier in the NWA. They had learned to work and were selling, and in many ways, it was a Goldberg syndrome. They were better as workers, but it wasn't what the fans wanted them to be. After years of being invincible against everyone, being just the top tag team in the WWF was a step down. While many thought them selling more and doing more jobs in their NWA days would have been better for their longevity as an act, the fact is, at least the part about doing clean jobs at the time would have killed their special mystique. Their act could only have longevity in Japan, where they were used sparingly, and if the territorial system had survived, where them just making appearances could remain something special. Still, it was a pretty big deal when they beat the Nasty Boys in Madison Square Garden at SummerSlam of 1991, on August 26, to win the tag team titles. The title loss, on February 7, 1992, to Ted DiBiase and IRS Rotunda, in Denver, was quite strange. First, it was at a house show. Second, it was clearly not planned in advance, as on all the WWF television shows that aired the next weekend. It was never acknowledged. Third, the DiBiase and IRS tag team, later called Money Incorporated, had not even debuted on television. Fourth, none of four knew when they got to the building the title was going to change hands, although it was known DiBiase and IRS were eventually going to beat them before WrestleMania to win the belts to set up a return at the big show. Not only that, but unlike today, in those days, they advertised matches and actually didn't switch them up at random. LOD was scheduled to face their usual opponents at the time, Earthquake, John Tenta, and Typhoon, Fred Ottman, the appropriately named natural disasters. LOD also had to be promised that there would be no film of the match to agree to do the switch, so even though a crew was brought to the show, the switch didn't air on television. Hawk had been out for a few weeks with a hip pointer and this was his first match back. The only finish they'd agree to was with outside interference, so Sensational Sherry, who wasn't even DiBiase and IRS manager, distracted ref Earl Hebner as Typhoon hit Hawk with a chair, allowing DiBiase to get the pin. At the house shows the rest of the week in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, the LOD came to the ring with the belts and were still announced as champions, and retained them beating the Disasters. Hawk was then informed after finishing those dates that he had failed a drug test. This was the period the company was becoming vigilant and cracking down on drug usage, and was suspended for 6 weeks, which explains why all this happened the way it did. With him out during the Mania build-up, the company instead turned the Disasters' faces to feud with Money Incorporated, and the Warriors weren't even on WrestleMania. SummerSlam that year was at Wembley Stadium, and after beating Money Incorporated, who had lost the belts previously to the Disasters, but were set to regain them and feud with the LOD over them, Hawk went wild and disappeared. He had already talked his way out of a second drug suspension, as Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale informed him he had tested positive for steroids. Hawk then insisted to Di Pasquale that he had been clean. Di Pasquale then said he could look into Hawk's eyes and see he was telling the truth, and rescinded the suspension. Hawk went AWOL in England and missed his flight back home, and basically at the same time both quit and was fired. Animal began teaming with Bryan Adams as Crush as the new LOD, but that didn't last long, as it didn't get over. Very soon after that, Animal suffered a broken tailbone, and claimed he was disabled, enabling him to collect a lucrative Lloyd's of London insurance policy. Hawk had no interest in working for WCW, and Baba wasn't interested in taking him back. While he was with the WWF, the Road Warriors worked a couple of tours for Super World Sports, a company funded by billionaire Hachiro Tanaka, which was paying McMahon big money for WWF talent. Their biggest match was March 30, 1991, at the Tokyo Dome, and they, wrestling as the Road Warriors instead of LOD, beat Hogan and Tenryu via countout before 36,000 fans. Baba felt that since he had treated them so well, that they should have refused to come to Japan and work what he considered opposition to him. Hawk called New Japan to see if they would be interested. Masa Saito, who was friends with Hawk dating back to the AWA days, broached an idea to him. Since Animal's career was supposedly over, he asked if they could try something different. The company had been wanting to push Kensuke Sasaki up to the level of Keiji Muto, Shinya Hashimoto, and Masahiro Chono, the company's three big stars, but it wasn't clicking with the crowd. While Sasaki was shorter than Animal, he was a stocky powerhouse who could bench 450 and do almost all the same power moves. The concept was to create a new Road Warriors, with Sasaki as Power Warrior, the Japanese Road Warrior. The upside is that Hawk would work every tour in Japan and possibly become a national hero, as while Antonio Inoki had teamed with Bob Backlund in some tag team tournaments, there hadn't been a full-time American and Japanese headliner tag team since Giant Baba and the Destroyer in the 70s. The idea was it would make Sasaki into the superstar bookers Riki Choshu and Hiroshi Haze, both of whom were his friends, wanted him to be, since he would be taking the place of Animal in the world's most famous tag team. Hawk agreed, and on November 23, 1992, before a sellout of 11,500 fans at Tokyo Sumo Hall, the new Road Warriors debuted, beating bookers Choshu and Hiroshi Haze in 3:02, in Road Warrior fashion, doing one power move after another on Haze, who was pinned by Sasaki after a power slam, and went out on a stretcher to get the team over. Huge. There was one big problem. Animal was furious. While the two were like brothers in the early days, and were best friends again later, at this point they were at odds. He complained long and loud about the pairing. Clearly he was not considering his retirement permanent. Hawk was able to pacify him by saying that they wouldn't use the Road Warrior name, which Animal did partially own the rights to, and that when Animal returned, it would do an angle in New Japan where they would turn on Sasaki, which never happened. On the next tour, while Hawk was sitting at a bar in Japan, he started thinking about what would come after a Black Sabbath song. He decided it should be an Ozzy Osbourne solo song. While at a nightclub in Roppongi in downtown Tokyo, he heard the song Hellraiser by Osbourne, and decided that was it, and the Hellraisers were born on December 14, 1992, when they won the IWGP Tag Team titles from Scott Norton and Tony Halme before a sellout 6,850 fans at Osaka Furitsu Gym. They had a show-stealing match with the Steiner brothers on the January 4, 1993, show at the sold-out Tokyo Dome, 53,500, only with a flat double count-out finish as the Steiners refused to do the job. They retained the belts with wins over Halme and Rambo from Austria. Rambo was put over because he had a singles feud with Hawk in Austria, which included a 6-month run where Hawk held his only singles world title in Europe, Halme and Bobby Eaton, Chono and Hashimoto and Muto and Hashimoto. It was like if Van Halen had a Japanese star, said Saito. Billy Robinson in the late 60s was the first foreigner who lived and worked full-time in Japan as a babyface. Baba and Destroyer were the most famous Japanese U.S. tag team. Hawk sold a lot, and always gave Kensuke the hot tag. That was the role he played with Animal, setting him up to look good. He really put Kensuke over like a superstar. With the Steiners having signed with WWF, the Hellraisers lost their main foreign opponents. In August, as part of the G1 tournament, which had 7 straight nights booked in Sumo Hall, one of the themes was Stop the Hellraisers, to see who could beat them for the titles and end their unbeaten streak. In 1 week they retained their belts over Haku and the Barbarian, the Nasty Boys, and Tenryu and Ashurahara before losing on August 5, 1993 to the Jurassic Powers, Scott Norton, and Hercules Hernandez before 9,000 fans. Power was injured, leaving Hawk against both men. He was double-teamed for several minutes, worn down, and finally pinned by Norton in 13:36 after a power slam. Even though he was double-teamed, the crowd was stunned seeing Hawk do a job, since he hadn't lost a clean fall in Japan in more than 8 years. In a rematch 3 nights later, before a sellout 11,500, Hawk got Hernandez chain and used it on him, and was disqualified. In late September, New Japan had its biggest non-dome house show week in company history, paced by a sellout of 17,000 fans at Yokohama Arena on September 23, 1993, when Hogan and Great Muta beat the Hellraisers when Hogan pinned Sasaki with an axe bomber in 15:29. Hogan had told Hawk he wanted to do a singles program with him, probably because he was the biggest star of their era that Hogan had never beaten, but it never materialized. The Hellraisers beat the Jurassic Powers to regain the titles on January 4, 1994, at the Tokyo Dome before 48,000. The Hellraisers vs. Steiner Brothers feud restarted on May 1, 1994, at the Fukuoka Dome as the Steiners left WWF. Before an announced 53,500 at the Fukuoka Dome, 10,000 less would likely be the accurate number. They handed the Steiners their first loss as a tag team ever in Japan when Scott was pinned after the Doomsday Device. A rematch saw Scott get pinned again on September 27, 1994, at Osaka Castle Hall in what was a disappointing match. They lost the titles to Muto and Hazy on November 25, 1994, in high weight when Muto pinned Hawk in 25-37 with a Frankensteiner. Their last big match as a team was on September 20, 1995, when they lost to IWGP Tag Champs Hashimoto and Junji Hirata when Hawk was pinned by Hirata. Animal returned to Japan on April 29, 1996, teaming with Hawk and Power over the Steiners and Scott Norton at a sold-out Tokyo Dome on the Hashimoto vs. Nobuhiko Takada show. The Road Warriors reformed and worked WCW, WWF, and New Japan, but they were clearly living off their reps. When Hawk has his chance in 1995 to work as a single in WCW, while Animal was injured and the Hellraisers had largely run their course, he was not a success. His most memorable feud, and it wasn't all that memorable, was with Manabu Nakanishi, using the name Kurosawa, who supposedly broke his arm at the October 29, 1995, Halloween Havoc pay-per-view with an armbar, allowing him to head back to Japan. His comeback for revenge was even more forgettable, as it went nowhere. Their last national hurrah would have been when they had many big matches over the tag titles in WWF in 1997-98, challenging both Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith as well as the New Age Outlaws for the WWF tag team titles. They won the belts from the Godwins and lost to the Outlaws, but the highlight of that run was the main event of one of the best shows the company ever put on, the July 6, 1997, Calgary Stampede pay-per-view. As part of Team USA, with Ken Shamrock and Steve Austin and Goldust, they lost one of the company's most heated main events of the era to the Hart Foundation team of Bret and Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith and Brian Pillman and Jim Neidhart. The WWF put Drozdov into the group as a three-man team, but the idea was to phase out Hawk, who was in bad shape by this time. But after getting rid of Hawk with the angle when he tried to commit suicide, and with him acting like he was loaded on television, the Animal and Droz team as LOD 2000 never got off the blocks, and Animal was dropped, as they were considered too hard to work with for their spot on the pecking order. They bounced around indie groups in the US and Japan in recent years. Thanks to Alexander Otska, they were put over in a big way in the MMA world. On October 11, 1998, the Battle-Arts pro wrestler scored one of the great upsets in MMA history when he defeated Marco Ruiz, largely due to Ruiz gassing out, at the Tokyo Dome on the undercard of the second Hickson Gracie vs. Takada match. At the post-match press conference, Otska said he was thrilled with the win, but it was a lot bigger deal to him his upcoming match, the Road Warriors, in Battle-Arts' biggest show ever on November 23, 1998, at Sumo Hall. The foreign MMA reporters laughed, thinking Otska was telling a joke, but the Japanese reporters understood that Otska grew up in as a wrestling fan in a world where MMA and Marco Ruiz didn't exist, but the Road Warriors were larger than life. And even though he made a name for himself as a legit guy, which he's since lived down, and was ranked at the top in May top 10s among heavyweights in the world, he was only too glad to play stooge for the Warriors' well-known powerhouse spots. But in their first Japan appearance in years, it was clear they weren't the same, and since that time have largely been viewed as a nostalgia act. Their last high-profile match in Japan was May 2, 1999, on an all-Japan show at the Tokyo Dome that drew 55,000 fans as a memorial to the recently deceased Giant Baba. The Warriors teamed with Animal's brother, Johnny Ace, to beat Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Hakushi in the semi-main event underneath the Mitsuharu Misawa Triple Crown title win over Vader. Several groups, including Superstars of Wrestling in Australia, Andrew McManus First Promotion, and the XWF, with designs on being major players in the US scene, used them as their top tag team. They were told they would be getting 2 tryout matches to get back in WWE on May 12th and May 13th of this year, but instead, the first night, in Philadelphia, was made a tag title match on the Live Raw with Rob Van Dam and Kane. They had the Warriors sell most of the way, but Hawk didn't earn many points by popping right up after laying down for Kane's choke slam, and the decision was made not to offer them a deal. They worked 2 shows for TNA, but were never used again. For the first time since 1990, they were reunited with Ellering, There was a tease on WWE television in the Russo Swerve Happy Era where Ellering was brought back for a week, but instead turned on them on June 7th in Oak Lawn, Illinois for what was billed as the 20th anniversary of the formation of the Road Warriors, an indie show that drew 1,064 fans. Of late they had worked mainly for WJ, where they even put over the Shane twins in Japan. WJ booked with the idea of building around creating new stars by having them beat established superstars like the Road Warriors, Tenryu, and Choshu. Unfortunately, beating the Road Warriors didn't come close to make the Shanes, or anyone else, by that point. It was not well known that Hawk at one point volunteered to donate a portion of his liver to Graham, who was very bitter about his death. Of course, his liver wasn't in good enough shape to donate. The two had become good friends in recent years. In fact, Graham's wife Valerie always referred to him as our Hawk. I won't dare ask the question why to anyone, for there is no pastor, priest, rabbi, or holy man walking the face of this earth that can answer that question, he wrote in a letter to Animal to be read at the funeral. So I bitterly accept the fact that my dear friend is gone from my life. There is no way that I can relate to you what Hawk has meant to me. All I know is that he is irreplaceable. Mike Hextran's funeral took place on October 28 in Seminole, Florida, attended by about 250 people, including Joe Laurinaitis, who gave a eulogy, and read another eulogy from Graham, Ellering, Vince McMahon, whose travels over 5 days included a funeral in Calgary, a wedding in New York, a Raw in North Carolina on Monday night, a funeral Tuesday afternoon in Florida, and a SmackDown taping Tuesday night in Atlanta. Shawn Michaels, Ted DiBiase, Nikolai Volkov, whose wife sang Sasaki, Masao Hattori, Steve Williams, Mark Canterbury, Terry Taylor, Ryan Blair, Tom, and Bruce Pritchard, Dave Heath, Luna Vachon, Scott Norton, George Napolitano, and Greg Valentine. The day before, Hulk Hogan and Kevin Waycalls appeared at a private invitation-only service, and another service was scheduled for October 30th in New Brighton, Minnesota. The legend of the Road Warriors in hindsight asks many questions. They changed the business, and probably not in a good way, but the effects of those changes are for the most part no longer all that much in effect. Were they themselves good for business? The Georgia promotion that went down with them on top was going down either way. As was the AWA, although they did harm some successful acts while at the same time kept the company stronger than it would have been without them. In the long run, the end result also would have been the same. For Crockett, they were a huge part of the 1985-87 success, and while they got stale, that was more the promotion not creating new headline talent. Their salaries probably didn't pay for themselves after signing the big contract, but that was hardly their fault, but more Crockett misreading his eventual pay-per-view success level. The Road Warriors worked with strong enough heels like the Horsemen and Midnight Express that their no-selling act probably didn't hurt the company. And for years, greatly helped when several different companies were all jockeying for who would wind up number 2, and Flair and the Warriors were the most valuable commodities. For All Japan, they were a great attraction team, and Baba booked them in a fashion that they never hurt the credibility of his money players. In hindsight, Baba and Fritz von Erich, who never used them, were the two promoters who understood their strengths and limitations the best. With WWF, they were not booked in a way where they were either a major help, nor in their first run were they a negative, other than the almost comical rush nature of the night in Denver when they had to rush the belts off of them and when it was over. The overall disappointing tenure coming in as such big stars. The Hellraisers were the hottest tag team for their time in New Japan, which was a boom period for the company and in reality, extended Hawk's career as a superstar. But even with Hawk's help, Kensuke Sasaki never reached the stardom the promotion had hoped for him. And by the end of the team, Hawk's problems had led to his work rate declining to where New Japan really couldn't use him as a regular any longer. His work wasn't good enough to keep his top spot and fans were catching on. But he was far too big a superstar to be embarrassed by having to put over mid-carders. It was sad in the late 90s in WWF that the once legendary Road Warriors had become a team mocked behind their back by their peers. They were immortalized in Mick Foley's books for his legendary Hextran pops, where Hawk would come to the dressing room and tell the rest of the guys, "Did you hear a pop?" Which by that point was no different from many other acts on the show. In the end, most fans will think of their 1983 to 1988 period as the hottest tag team ever when the name Road Warriors is brought up, and the numerous magazine covers around the world they donned. But in the end, the far more important question when it comes to wrestling should be, and this has absolutely nothing to do with business, is was it worth it? The latest moves from Hulk Hogan, informing TNA on October 21st that he would be undergoing knee surgery on October 31st and thus would be unavailable for the proposed November 30th pay-per-view show he was scheduled to headline against Jeff Jarrett, have gotten many people in the company suspicious. Hogan has verbally agreed to come in for a date in February for a match with Jarrett for the NWA title, which is awfully close to WrestleMania 20. The company went through with its original plan to turn Jarrett Hill and AJ Styles babyface in the October 22 match where Jarrett won the title with a belt shot to the face in 12-13. Scott Hall had been contacted and asked if he and Sean Waltman would do a run-in on Hogan for the finish of the original show. The decision was made not to announce a rescheduled date for the show, with the feeling February is so far away and things can happen. What was strange was that on the October 22 TNA show, where Jimmy Hart appeared in the role of Hogan's manager, to apparently start an old-style Memphis program where Hart would bring in protégés, only as a babyface, to gain revenge on Jarrett, Honky Tonk Man has said he was asked to appear on October 29 to put over Jarrett, but turned it down, was Hart saying Hogan had signed a contract with TNA, which he hadn't. The storyline wound up based a lot around the 2000 Bash at the Beach match in Daytona Beach. In that one, Jarrett, based on the storyline the company ran, with Hogan, Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo trying to work the boys and everyone to theoretically create the impact of the 1997 Survivor Series, had Jarrett laid down on orders from Vince Russo against Hogan, because Hogan was using his creative control and refusing to job for Jarrett, and insisted on winning the title. The idea at the time was for Hogan to win a version of the title and leave, and for Booker T to get a new version of the title. At Halloween Havoc, Hogan was supposed to return for a unification deal to determine who was the real WCW champion. However, Russo double-crossed his partners in the swerve, much as Brian Pillman had when he created this genre, and Hogan ended up never coming back and suing WCW and Russo, which is why Russo will be out of TNA as long as Hogan's Spectre is involved. Hart and Mike Tenay both asked Jarrett about why he laid down for Hogan in the biggest match of his career. Jarrett told Hart not to broach that subject, but Hart kept on him and even got the crowd to chant, "Why? Why?" Jarrett then attacked Hart, tore off his shirt, took off his belt, and whipped him hard with it. This led to Hart at the end of the show doing the old school deal where he did his promo with his back to the camera to show the real-life marks, and vowed to bring in someone he managed in the past for revenge next week. Another question many are asking is regarding Hogan's right knee injury. Hogan has a history of bad knees, and anyone who has watched him wrestle over the last many years can see the knees have given him more problems than any other body part. Those who have socialized with Hogan note that he moves very slowly when the cameras are off because of knee damage. He had an artificial knee put in a few years back and has had several knee surgeries in recent years. Hogan has also worked for years on bad knees, and this is only one match. Jimmy Hart told the TNA officials that Hogan wanted to make sure he was 100% and not limp through the match, but Hogan's athletic ability has never been a major part of his aura. Whether his knees are healthy or not, his match quality isn't going to change appreciably, and however the crowd is going to react to him would be the same either way. It was also noted while Hogan could have suffered a minor injury in the October 13 match with Masahiro Chono and not realized it in the heat of the match, it could not have been that serious, because he appeared at a New Japan Company meeting the next day walking around the same as he did the day before the Chono match. Reporters also noted he was not limping when he went home. The story given was the knee started swelling up days later and he went to get it checked, and when the test came back on October 21, they immediately contacted TNA and asked to get the show delayed. Where the suspicion got deeper is that you have to look at the first thing a wrestler, and certainly one as experienced as Hogan, would think of in this situation. If Hogan was committed to TNA, he would have flown to Nashville on October 22, shown up, and done an angle where Jarrett injured his knee, and thus created a storyline reason. Hart did blame Jarrett for the knee injury from the beating in Japan instead, so they did give him that much, and Hart did go on their television and pretty much tell everyone Hogan is on the way. Clearly the expectation is that his knee is only getting arthroscopic surgery, since he's still committed to New Japan for January 4, and if he had major knee surgery, April or May would be the earliest he'd be able to come back. It is routine for wrestlers needing minor surgery to do a television angle to set up their exit and give them a stronger program to come back, even if, in recent years, it's usually forgotten. Hogan is different because he needs to be seen rarely to keep himself special enough that the match stays a big deal. However, when TNA officials attempted to get Hart to have Hogan do a telephone interview on the October 22 show, which was in the original booking plans, Hogan was to do a phone interview on October 22 to lead to his only live appearance at the Fairgrounds on October 29. Hart at first told officials that Hogan was spending all day at the doctor. When the idea of being at the doctor at 9:30 p.m. on a Wednesday night wasn't all that realistic, he said that Hogan had to play Mr. Mom that night, watching his two children. His kids are now both teenagers, the oldest of which, daughter Brooke, they are grooming to be a celebrity singer. While Hogan is not going to do anything more than agreed to, nor should he in most cases, in this situation, because the company had to change the show date and eat major crow in the cable industry because of it, Hogan did owe them a favor. Doing a phone interview or making a live appearance at that point should not be out of the question. Ultimately, and more important, even if and when he signs, the current deal is only for one show. In the long run, it will only benefit TNA if they can include Hogan's likeness in long-term merchandising, because one appearance isn't opening any doors to a television deal. He can't appear weekly in Nashville, as that would be stupid, but if he isn't going to commit to being a recurring character, I'm not sure how this benefits TNA. Hogan has been very careful throughout his career at avoiding flops being on his watch, with the exception of the last WCW run. In WWE, he left in 1992 just before the bottom dropped out, which many people saw coming. When his 1993 comeback was not a business success, he got out as quickly as he could without the decline ever sticking to him. He started working in New Japan, the hottest promotion in the world at the time, and doing his own TV show, Thunder in Paradise. He got a sweetheart deal with WCW, and was always around when things were good, and when things started getting bad, started coming up with angles on numerous occasions to lead to hiatuses, with the idea business would drop without him and he'd make a big splash on his return. That was the same game he's played since February 2002 with WWE, and if his appearances lead to diminishing returns in Japan, and most likely that is what will happen, I'd suspect that pattern to continue. It's not the money as much as the aura, although many in WWE believe he walked out in June more because he got a reported $250,000 Mania payoff and not because, as he has claimed, he was upset with how a SmackDown TV match was overly scripted where he teamed with Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle in Madison Square Garden, and how he was being used. Hogan turned down huge money offers from the Wrestle One group in Japan when he recognized they didn't have a clue what they were doing and weren't going to draw. Just recently, he turned down a $300,000 offer for one show by the sponsors of the proposed 01 and Pride combined show at Yokohama Arena show on October 26, the show Goldberg was going to be booked on before it ended up being cancelled. The odds are certainly against a group with such weak television as TNA in a soft US market, just on the basis of Hogan's name, doing big business on pay-per-view, although without question, it is TNA's best shot at doing any numbers. WWE sold pay-per-view events based on names like Sting, Lex Luger, and Randy Savage, who had not wrestled for long periods of time in the US, and did no pay-per-view business. Sting did help TNA a little for one show, but the numbers he drew would be considered a huge flop if Hogan pulled the same numbers. It's also doubtful a return appearance by Sting would mean much, just as recent appearances from Roddy Piper and Dusty Rhodes don't look to have sparked business, because nostalgia only works in small doses. Granted, Hogan is much bigger than any of them, but he was only a miracle worker when it came to garnering crowd pops, but not for ratings or house show attendance, in his last WWE run. For TNA, if Hogan really was committed, it is a risk worth taking. But if it turns out to be one shot or no shots, in the long run there is no chance of success. Roughly 700 people, I've heard estimates of 500 to 1,500 from various sources, came for Stu Hart's funeral on October 22nd in Calgary. Several there live said it was a very fitting tribute combining stories of triumph, comedy and tearful stories, particularly speeches by sons Bruce, Ross, and Brett. Brett, who fought back tears, talked about how he thought it was a normal childhood to grow up with a wrestling bear under the porch licking ice cream off his feet. I don't think anybody could dispute how enormous Stu Hart's contribution to wrestling was, said Vince McMahon to reporters. He put Calgary and Canada on the map of the world. There's no way to calculate that contribution. McMahon came to the services with Jim Ross and WWE Canada President Carl DeMarco. Chris Jericho, Edge, Lance Storm and Chris Benoit also came. Also speaking was Alberta Premier Ralph Klein. McMahon and Ross were said to have been besieged by media, who sought them out and not the other way around, as they were clearly not there for attention. The service lasted more than 2.5 hours with eulogies by Stu's brother-in-law Jock Osler, husband of one of Helen's sisters, who mentioned that Vince was there even though his daughter was getting married in 2 days. Klein, Frank Sisson, a local casino owner who is like another Stu Hart as a community institution and knew him for about 50 years, and the sons. Brett talked about his father's unique way of looking at life. Once when a kid was trying to steal one of his Cadillacs, Stu caught him, took him downstairs and tortured him for hours, and then called the kid's father. Then he gave the kid a job as an usher for his weekly Friday night wrestling shows. Brett spoke for a long time, one estimate being 40 minutes, and mostly told funny stories that had the audience in stitches. Vince called him later that day to tell him what a great job he had done. The famed Hart house is going to be sold with the proceeds divided up among the children. Some, including Brett, had talked about wanting to turn it into a wrestling museum, but ultimately the decision was to sell it, and a deal is already pending. It may be used as a senior citizen's home. There are subdivisions all over the area, so the land is probably worth a ton. Among other wrestlers in attendance from the old days of Stampede Wrestling were Bad News Allen, Dan Crawford, the original, Cuban Assassin, Jim Neidhart, Gama Singh, Tor Kamada, Jerry Morrow, Ben Bossarab, Mr. Hito and managers Abu Wizzle and Hutch Thomas, Dr. Drago Zyabago. Daniel Igali, who won a gold medal in the 2000 Olympics for Canada in wrestling, also came in for the funeral, which Brett noted would have really made his father proud that a legitimate Olympic gold medal winning wrestler was there. Paul J., who produced movies on the lives of Brett and Owen, Wrestling with Shadows and the Life and Times of Owen Hart, was there as well, who has been busy attempting to start his own news network to rival CNN and FNN. Alderman Craig Burrows, who serves the district that included Hart's house and was once a neighbor of the Harts, said after the funeral that he wants a city street, building or park named after Stu. I'd like to see the city do something to commemorate his life and what they've, the Hart family, done for the city of Calgary, saying they put the city on the map with Stampede Wrestling. He said he'll bring it up at an alderman meeting this week. We don't have full details on the October 27th Raw other than the show did a 3.40 rating on hours of 3.40 and 3.40, which is what I figured since the show was stopped dead about an hour in with Shane versus Test. The Miami Dolphins versus San Diego Chargers MNF game did a 10.7218, which is also below the season average. We don't have complete details other than the ratings pattern stunk. The high point was the Shane versus Test match at 3.75. These numbers of viewers gained and lost are approximations. Henry versus Storm lost 157,000 viewers in a slot which should gain 200,000 or more. Hurricane and Heidenreich versus Conway and Dupree gained 138,000 viewers, which is decent considering who was in there but not good for the slot. Shane versus Test gained 354,000 viewers, which is good, and it died from there. Trish versus Victoria versus Kim versus Lita lost about 492,000 viewers. Flair and Orton versus Cade and Jindrak gained 5,000 viewers. The first RVD versus Jericho title match was actually the low point of the show, even below the opening segment, doing a 3.10 rating and losing 360,000 viewers. That is usually a bad time for the show as people are turning out because they aren't loyal enough to stay the 2 hours, and the people who tune out usually tune back in at 11 p.m. figuring it's the climax, so the last quarter is a tough spot. But this was worse than usual. The comeback of 433,000 viewers for the overrun with the cage match with RVD versus Jericho is a good comeback, but the 3.43 main event rating is not good. The October 23rd SmackDown drew a 3.62 rating, 4.11 realistic rating, best. 5.89 million viewers, which would be the largest audience to watch SmackDown in more than 1 year. What is interesting is that the metered market ratings the past several weeks have been at record lows, while the final ratings have been very good. My impression has always been that the metered markets are probably more accurate because you are combining ratings in 55 different samples, whereas the national rating is just one sample. In the 80s, there was something like a 13-week upward blip of the World Championship Wrestling show that made no sense, since the company wasn't doing anything different, and a TV programmer told me they probably just were lucky in the sample containing more wrestling fans than usual and it would go away when they switched homes, which it did. Particularly, when these numbers are being drawn at a time when all other business is terrible, and the competition has been fierce. Then again, if the Vince versus Stephanie match ends up doing 350,000 buys on pay-per-view, then we'll know it's the angle that worked and the metered markets numbers are the ones that are off, and we'll know that in a week or two. As far as competition went, the World Series did a 13.20 rating/21 share, which was down 23% from the American League playoffs the previous Thursday, which usually doesn't happen. I guess the huge baseball ratings in recent weeks can be attributed an awful lot to the Boston market and not a resurgence of national interest in baseball. Survivor did a 11.6518, Friends did 12.3820 for a first-run episode, which is terrible for that show and was the only NBC show against SmackDown to top a 10 as Will and Grace only did an 8.9. CSI did a 16.9925. The show did a 4.2 in New York, 5.0 in Los Angeles, which did increase from 4.1 to 6.5 for the Guerreros versus Bassoms and went back down to 5.1 when the match ended, 5.2 in Chicago, 4.7 to 5.7 for Guerreros versus Bassoms, Philadelphia, 2.8 to 3.9 for Guerreros Bassoms, 2.0 in San Francisco, 1.4 to 2.3 for Guerreros Basams, 5.5 in Dallas, 5.8 to 6.3 for Guerreros Basams, 3.6 in DC, 4.2 to 3.6, 4.6 in Detroit, 5.3 to 3.7 for Guerreros Basams and 3.7 to 4.8 for Main Event, 3.6 in Atlanta and 6.0 in Houston, 5.7 to 7.3 for Guerreros Basams. On the national numbers, which are very different, the show opened with a huge first quarter with the announcement of Heyman as GM at 3.36. In a time slot that usually grows, Angle and Benoit vs. Cena and A-Train lost 129,000 viewers. After that, the show had a positive ratings pattern in that there were no losing quarters. The beginning of Rikishi and Scotty vs. Haas and Benjamin gained 150,000 viewers. In the time slot after Friends ends, I don't think it would mean that much with the Friends number down, but last season, that time slot usually had big gains even with people like Kidman. Guerreros vs. Basams title change gained 512,000 new viewers, but it. Tajiri vs. Gowan gained 15,000 new viewers. The main event with Undertaker vs. Lesnar and Show gained 504,000 viewers to a show peak of 4.01, which is a realistic 4.56. An interesting demo note is that among teenagers, the show did a 4.8 among males and a 1.2 among females. Among 18 to 34, it did a 2.0 among males and 1.6 among females. The October 20th Raw show's 3.66 rating was from a 3.54 first hour and 3.77 seconds hour, with 4.72 million viewers. The big hit on the show was the first meeting ever with Goldberg vs. Michaels, which gained 918,000 new viewers to a 4.37 rating, the peak of the show. The second peak, a 3.78 rating, was for the Van Dam and Storm vs. Jericho and Steiner finish and the tributes to Hawk and Stu Hart. The rating pattern was different than usual, because the first quarter with the Austin/Test/Keebler angle drew a 3.54 rating, but there was little growth in the subsequent quarters. Booker vs. Orton gained 13,000 viewers. The angle where Henry attacked Goldberg and beginning of Van Dam and Storm vs. Jericho and Steiner gained 250,000 viewers. The finish of that match, plus the comments on Hawk and Stu Hart gained 106,000 viewers. Test and Lita vs. Molly and Victoria lost 224,000 viewers. Flair vs. Maven lost 34,000 viewers, which in that time slot is quite a bit better than it usually does. The Kane interview in return of Triple H gained 30,000 viewers, which is also stronger than usual for the slot. For October 25th, Heat at 7 p.m. on Saturday instead of Sunday did a 0.52 rating, which is the lowest in the history of the show, but that's not unexpected being put in an unfamiliar time slot. They did a Joe Schmo marathon on Spike TV on October 26th. Velocity did a 0.66, Confidential did a 0.63, so the rerun show did better than the first run shows have been doing for the past many weeks. Galavision Lucha Libre on October 18th drew a 1.31 Hispanic rating in the Galavision universe, and the October 19th show drew a 1.22. Results. October 22nd Nashville, NWA TNA pay-per-view 1,250, Shane Douglas b. Brian Gamble, David Young b. Jimmy Rave, Abyss b. C.B. Kane, CM Punk and Julio De Niro b. Nate Matson and Briar Wellington, Conan and B.G. James and Ron Killings b. Sonny Siaki and Ikmo and Joe Legend, Kid Cash b. Sonya Dutt, Tag Titles, Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger b. Danny During and Roadkill, X Title, Michael Shane won three-way over Christopher Daniels and Chris Sabine, Dog Collar Match, Raven b. Slash, Chris Harris and James Storm b. Andy Douglas and Chase Stevens, NWA title, Jeff Jarrett b. AJ Styles to win title. October 22nd Omuta, New Japan 1,700 Naofumi Yamamoto b. Haruki Goto, Tiger Mask and the Heat b. Super Crazy and Ryusuke Taguchi, Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto and El Samurai b. Gedo and Jado and Katsushi Takamura, Ryushi Yanagisawa b. Shinya Makabe, Tadao Yasuda and Makai Club IB Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto, Mike Barton and Jim Steele b. Manabu Nakanishi and Toru Yano, Yoshihiro Takayama and Toa b. Yuji Nagata and Blue Wolf, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Osamu Nishimura b. Hiroshi Tanahashi and Yutaka Yoshi. October 22nd Okayama, Pro Wrestling Noah 2000, Jun Izumida b. Haruka Eigen, Michael Modest and Donovan Morgan D. Juventud Guerrera and Ricky Marvin 20 minutes, Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Makoto Hashibi Kenta and Kotaro Suzuki, Takashi Sugiura and Daisuke Ikeda B2 Cold Scorpio and Richard Slinger, Akira Tao and Takuma Sano and Masashi Aoyagi be Yoshinari Ogawa and Muhammad Yone and Kishin Kawabata, Jun Akiyama and Akitoshi Saito be Mitsuharu Misawa and Masao Inoue, Takeshi Morishima and Takeshi Rikyo and Namichi Marufuji be Kenta Kobashi and Tomoe Honda and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. October 22, Nagano, All Japan, 2300, Shigeo Okamura D. Nobukazu Hirai, Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. be High 69 and Taichi Ishikari, Low-Ki and Grand Hamada be Kendo Kashin and Yatsu Arano, Gigantes be Kazushi Miyamoto, Toshiaki Kawada and Masafuchi and Ryuji Hijikata be Satoshi Kojima and Kaz Hayashi and Tomoaki Honma, D'Lo Brown and Gigantes and Takamichi Noku be Keiji Muto and Arashi and Masayuki Kono. October 23, Kumamoto, New Japan, 2000, Naofumi Yamamoto be Akiya Onzawa, Hiro Saito be Toru Yano, Tiger Mask and the Heat be Hiroki Goto and Ryusuke Taguchi, Koji Kanemoto and Super Crazy and El Samurai be Geto and Jado and Katsushi Takemura, Shinya Makabe and Toa be Osamu Nishimura and Tatsutoshi Goto, Shinsuke Nakamura and Blue Wolf be Hiroshi Tanahashi and Yutaka Yoshi, Mike Barton and Jim Steele be Tadao Yasuda and Makai Club I, Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi be Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Jushin Liger. October 24, Hiroshima, Pro Wrestling Noah, 2600 sellout, Mitsuo Momota and Jun Izumida be Masashi Aoyagi and Kishin Kawabata, Two Cold Scorpio be Masao Inoue, Takashi Sugiura and Yoshinobu Kanemaru be Michael Modest and Donovan Morgan, Takeshi Morishima and Takeshi Rikyo be Takuma Sano and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Richard Slinger and Juventud Guerrera and Ricky Marvin be Kenta and Kotaro Suzuki and Namichi Marufuji, Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa and Muhammad Yone be Jun Akiyama and Akitoshi Saito and Makoto Hashi, GHC Tag Titles, Kenta Kobashi and Tomoe Honda be Akira Tao and Daisuke Ikeda. October 24, Niitsu, All Japan, 2000, Shigeo Okamura D. Nobukazu Hirai, Masafuchi and Taichi Ishikari be Jeremy Lopez and Masayuki Kono, Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. be Gran Hamada and Kazushi Miyamoto, Kendo Kashin and Yatsu Arano be Kaz Hayashi and High 69, Satoshi Kojima and Low-Ki be Toshiaki Kawada and Ryuji Hijikata, D'Lo Brown and Bull Buchanan and Gigantes be Keiji Muto and Arashi and Tomoaki Honma. October 24, Mexico City Arena, Mexico, CMLL TV tapings, Explosivo and Mano Negra Jr. be La Flecha and Super Commando, Neutron and Tigre Blanco and Tony Rivera be Hooligan and Sangre Azteca and Valentin Mayo, Alan Stone and Virus and Simvito be Rocco Quince and Rocky Romero and Ricky Reyes, Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 and Violencia be Bestia Salvaje and Emilio Charles Jr. and Pierre Roth Jr., Atlantis and Lismark Jr. and Mr. Niebla be Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero and Tarzan Boy. October 25, Sasebo, Pro Wrestling Noah, 1800, Kishin Kawabata be Haruka Eigen, Kenabe Kotaro Suzuki, Juventud Guerrera and Ricky Marvin and Richard Slinger be Takashi Sugiura and Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Masashi Aoyagi, Akira Tao and Daisuke Ikeda and Takuma San be Michael Modest and Donovan Morgan and Izu, Tomoe Honda and Muhammad Yone be Mitsuharu Misawa and Masao Inoue, Yoshinari Ogawa and Two Cold Scorpio be Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Takeshi Morishima and Takeshi Rikyo and Namichi Marufuji be Jun Akiyama and Akitoshi Saito and Makoto Hashi. October 25, Hirata, New Japan, 2000, Hiroki Goto be Akiya Onzawa, Tiger Mask and the Heat be Super Crazy and Azteca, Rishi Yanagisawa be Toru Yano, Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto be Osamu Nishimura and El Samurai, Geto and Jado and Katsushi Takemura be Jushin Liger and Koji Kanemoto and Ryusuke Taguchi, Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi be Blue Wolf and Shinsuke Nakamura, Tadao Yasuda and Makai Club be Yoshihiro Takayama and Toa Core, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Yutaka Yoshi and Hiroshi Tanahashi be Mike Barton and Jim Steele and Shinya Makabe. October 25, Spencerport, New York, Ring of Honor, 325, Slight Wagner Brown be Hydro, BJ Whitmer be Dan Moff, Dunn and Marcos won 4-way over Jimmy Jacobs and Alex Shelley, Fast Eddie and Don Juan and Outcast Killers, Christopher Daniels be John Walters, Tag Titles, Izzy and Dixie be Locke and DeVito, Jared Steele be Matt Lide, Xavier be Chris Sabine, Steve Corino DCM Punk, Walters won 4-way over Colt Cabana, Just Incredible, and Jimmy Rave, non-title, Homicide be Samoa Joe. October 25, Pistoia, Italy, CZW 800, Adam Flash be Axel Fury, Ladder Match, B-Boy be Sonya. Iron Man Match, Trent Acid be Ruckus, Tables Match, Nick Gage be Nate Hatred, CZW title, Zandig be Messiah to win title. And Ruckus be B-Boy and Acid. October 26th, Tokyo Budokan Hall, All Japan 31st Anniversary Show, 8,000, Shigeo Okamura b Bam Bam Hirai, Masafuchi and Ryuji Hijikata and Taichi Ishikari b Jeremy Lopez and High 69 and Kazushi Miyamoto, Low Key b Silver King, Mask of Tiger, Satoru Sayama, b Grand Hamada, Takamichi Noku and Gigante b Kaz Hayashi and Tomoaki Honma and Masayuki Kono Jr. Title, Kendo Kashin b Dr. Wagner Jr., Satoshi Kojima b Nobutaka Araya, World Tag Titles, Keiji Muto and Arashi b D. Low Brown and Bull Buchanan, Triple Crown, Toshiaki Kawada b Don Fry. October 26th, Kobe, New Japan 5500 Ryusuke Taguchi b Naofumi Yamamoto, Koji Kanemoto and El Samurai b The Heat and Super Crazy, Mike Barton and Jim Steele and Shinya Makabe b Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto and Toru Yano, Handicap Rules, Katsushi Takamura and Gedo and Jado b Tiger Mask, Tadao Yasuda and Rishi Yanagisawa b Osamu Nishimura and Ensign Inoue DQ, Minoru Suzuki b Hiroshi Tanahashi, Kazunari Murakami b Yutaka Yoshi, Manabu Nakanishi b Blue Wolf, Yuji Nagata b Shinsuke Nakamura, Yoshihiro Takayama and Toa b Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Jushin Liger. October 26th, Albany, Georgia, WWE SmackDown, 1600, Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hottie b Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin, Billy Kidman b Rhino, Matt Capitelli and John Hennigan b Sean O'Hare and Horseshoe, Tajiri won 3-way for Cruiserweight title over Jamie Noble and Ultimo Dragon, Chuck Palumbo and Johnny Stamboli and Nunzio b Spanky and Paul London and Orlando Jordan, Rey Mysterio b John Cena, tag titles, Basams b Eddie and Chavo Guerrero, Tori Wilson won 3-way bikini contest over Sable and Dawn Marie, SmackDown title, Brock Lesnar b Chris Benoit. October 26th, Florence, South Carolina, WWE Raw, 2000, Booker T b Randy Orton, Hurricane and Rosie b Travis Tomko and Kevin Fertig, Mark Henry b Tommy Dreamer, Lita and Ivory b Molly Holly and Gail Kim, tag title tables match, Dudleys b Rene Dupree and Rob Conway, Maven b Scott Steiner, Val Venis and Lance Storm b Rico and Steven Richards, IC title, Rob Van Dam b Chris Jericho. October 26th, Fukuoka, Pro Wrestling Noah 2700 Sellout, Donovan Morgan b Haruka Eigen, Tamon Honda and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Kishin Kawabata b Akitoshi Saito and Jun Izumida and Masashi Aoyagi, Kenta and Namichi Marufuji b Ricky Marvin and Richard Slinger, 2 Cold Scorpio and Michael Modest and Juventud Guerrera b Jun Akiyama and Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Makoto Hashi, Daisuke Ikeda and Muhammad Yone b Takeshi Rikyo and Takeshi Morishima, Kena Kobashi b Masao Inoue, Akira Tao and Takuma Sano and Takashi Sugiura b Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa and Kotaro Suzuki. October 26th, Monterrey, AAA, Los Payasos Locos b Atreu and Corazon de Leon and Takua, Lady Apache and Martha Villalobos and Princessa Blanca b Miss Janeth and Princessa Sujith and Tiffany, Los Diluvios Negros 1 and 2 and Eddie Watts b La Fiera and Silver Star and Turbina. Mexican National Atomicosh title, Alan and Billy Boy and Deakness and Oscar Seville b Mayflowers and Pimpinella Escarlata and Polvo de Estrellas and Sexy Francis, Abismo Negro and Mr. Aguila and Charlie Manson and Hater b Antifaz del Norte and Electroshock and La Parca Jr. and Zorro, Hair vs. Hair, Latin Lover b Hector Garza. October 27th, Fayetteville WWE Raw / Heat TV tapings 6000, Kevin Fertig and Travis Tonko b Tommy Dreamer and Michael Yamaha, Dudleys b Pat Cusick and Murray Happer, Bo Dup / Otto Schwantz, Maven b Steven Richards, Molly Holly b Ivory, Val Venis b Brad Hunter, Booker T b Rico, Mark Henry b Lance Storm, John Heidenreich and Hurricane b Rene Dupree and Rob Conway, Shane McMahon b Test, Lita won 4-way over Trish Stratus, Gail Kim, and Victoria, Lance Cade and Mark Jindrak b Ric Flair and Randy Orton, IC title, Chris Jericho b Rob Van Dam to win title, cage match for IC title, Van Dam b Jericho to regain title. October 27th, Augusta, Georgia, WWE SmackDown, 1400 Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hottie b Shelton Benjamin and Charlie Haas, Billy Kidman b Rhino, Horseshoe and Sean O'Hare b Matt Capitelli and John Hennigan, Tajiri won 3-way over Jamie Noble and Ultimo Dragon, Chuck Palumbo and Johnny Stamboli and Nunzio b Paul London and Spanky and Orlando Jordan, Rey Mysterio b John Cena, tag titles, Basams b Eddie and Chavo Guerrero, Dawn Marie won bikini contest over Sable and Tori Wilson, SmackDown title, Brock Lesnar b Chris Benoit. October 28th, Atlanta, WWE SmackDown / Velocity TV tapings, Horseshoe b Elix Skipper, Sean O'Hare and Jamie Noble b Spanky and Paul London b Murray Happer and Tajiri b Shannon Moore, Orlando Jordan b Canyon, Rhino b Billy Kidman, Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle b John Cena and A-Train, Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin b Chuck Palumbo and Johnny Stamboli and Nunzio, Ultimo Dragon b Rey Mysterio tag titles, Basams b Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hottie, APA&C Brock Lesnar and Big Show. October 28 Kamagane New Japan 1500 Toru Yanobi Akiya Onzawa, Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Gotobi Naofumi Yamamoto and Blue Wolf, Tiger Mask and the Heat b Koji Kanemoto and Hiroki Goto, Shinya Makabe b Super Crazy, Geto and Jado and Katsushi Takamura b Jushin Liger and El Samurai and Ryusuke Taguchi, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Osamu Nishimura Makai Club I and Tadao Yasuda, Yoshihiro Takayama and Toabi Hiroshi Tanahashi and Yutaka Yoshi, Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi b Mike Barton and Jim Steele. Special thanks to Brian Alvarez, Alex Merves, Scott Williams, Mike Kuzmuk, Jacob Gilbert, John Siska, Joe Willis, Jimmy Daniel, Stephen Kowalczyk, Bob Barnett, Jake White, Todd Garul, David Bernier, Chris Zellner, Devin Cutting, Mark Pickering, Rob Harvey, Dan Ball, Ron Sikoria, Tom Breslovsky, Brandon Thurston, Eric Bataxio, Ian Hamilton, Matt Benaka, Mike Valaza, Rob Moore, Michael Langan II, Gregory White, Larry Goodman, Ernie Santilli, David Taub, Jacob Burnett, Kyle Wolf, Steve Coulter, Alan Wojcik, Phil Jones, Manuel Gonzalez, Lawrence Price, Jason Owen, Michael Carpenter, Patrick Lono, Anthony Martella, Carlton Banks, Thomas Simpson, Bruce Buchanan, Gene Restaino, Robert Bahari, Michael Carpenter, Tommy Lang, Anthony Martella, Gary Will, Jeff Sheridan, Charlie Akagi, Tadashi Tanaka, Mark Sidar. Mexico. As it turned out, the plan for Latin Lover to lose his hair on the October 26th show in Monterrey was changed and Hector Garza got his head shaved in the biggest hair match in Mexico in months. Antonio Pena was wanting to use someone from TNA to interfere and cost Lover the match, including Vampiro. Vampiro was booked that day at Arena Coliseo teaming with Mil Mascaras, and nobody from TNA came down. Vampiro at press time he was planning on jumping to AAA at the end of this month, but that changes every week, and the last time I heard he was jumping, which was October 31st, is a date he's booked at Arena Mexico, so we'll know by next week. He's claiming after agreeing to stay with CMLL, he got an offer from Antonio Pena on paper. Pena's first TV taping of his LLL group for Multivision takes place on October 31st in Querétaro, and also has tapings November 15th in Cuernavaca and November 20th in Toluca. Veterans Villano Trace and Pirata Morgan are doing a hair versus hair cage match on October 28th in Reynosa. On the next AAA show in Monterrey they are doing a Santo and Nicho and Mystery Partner versus Second Psicosis and Blue Demon Jr. and Mystery Partner match. Apparently the Los Havana Pitbulls, Rocco Quince and Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero lost to Alan Stone and Zumbito and Virus on the October 24th Arena Mexico show was really hot. Virus pinned Romero clean to set up a match for Romero's CMLL Super Lightweight title at some point. Also on the show, Universo 2000 pinned Pierre Roth Jr. in a trios match and challenged him to a masked versus hair match. Main event saw Atlantis and Lizmark Jr. and Mr. Niebla over Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero and returning Tarzan Boy. The Halloween show has a Parejas Increíbles main event with Atlantis and Blue Panther and Niebla and Shocker versus Black Warrior and Negro Casas and Vampiro and Tarzan Boy. Puerto Rico, Nene has already quit WWC. He asked for the money he was owed from the last time he was in, and they didn't have it. WWC also asked for him to return the Puerto Rican title belt, but he claimed he didn't have it because he had sold it to an indie promoter. Chris Condito and Tammy Sitch, who have been working full-time for WWC and living in San Juan the past 6 months, finish up this coming week and will be moving to Daytona Beach and looking to get back into the US indie scene. Venom took a terrible fall and, I guess, is actually okay. He was supposed to fall off a balcony through a table, but missed the table and the back of his head crashed onto the arena floor. He's actually okay, but they are making an angle out of it as he was in a wheelchair and neck brace. He ended up getting out of the wheelchair to attack Ricky Banderas. Bison Smith, just called Bison, from Noah was in on October 25th to challenge Shane for the IWA title and will be back this coming weekend for matches with Ray Gonzalez. Chet Yablonski from HWA has just started. David Flair is now IC champion, as Savio Vega stripped Banderas of the title and gave it to Flair on October 18th, in Bayamon. 01, regarding the big show scheduled for October 25th that never took place, the one Goldberg was booked for, he had attempted to do it on both November 29th and December 7th, but in both cases, it didn't happen because they couldn't get Goldberg to agree to the date. Goldberg, who still owes Pride, which is co-promoting the show, a few days, will miss the December 29th Raw in San Antonio, but is scheduled back for the January 5th Raw show. The last word we had is they are planning it for January 4th at the Saitama Super Arena, which is so bad going the same day as the New Japan Tokyo Dome show. They are looking at a lineup of Goldberg, Keiji Muto, a Mascaras family tag team, Mil Mascaras, Dos Caras Jr. and or El Psicodelico Jr., Predator, Tom Howard, Naoya Ogawa, Kevin Randleman, Matt Ghaffari, Shinya Hashimoto, Satoshi Kojima, Shinjiro Otani, and Low Ki as the headliners. The first Hashimoto vs. Masato Tanaka singles match will headline the November 7th show at Korakuen Hall, which also includes Ogawa and Katsuhisa Fuji vs. Los Angeles Giant and Josh Dempsey. Hashimoto is starring in an upcoming movie, which will include a fight scene with K1 star Nicholas Pettas. They are working on putting together a gimmick match of Fat Slobs on December 14th at Sumo Hall with Matt Ghaffari, who goes about 400 pounds, most in midsection, and Emmanuel Yarborough, who is 6'7" and 700 pounds, and can't move. They did an angle months ago that wasn't followed up on, and Yarborough, best known from his UFC knockout loss to Keith Hackney, but he's much older and fatter now, literally made Ghaffari look like he was Kendall Windham, or Kohei Sato for a modern reference. They are doing an angle where Takao Mori and Koichiro Kimura have formed their own group to feud with Riki Choshu's group featuring Ichiro Yaguchi and Tomohiro Ishii. Joining with Mori and Kimura look to be Shiro Koshinaka and Yoji Anju, and there is a showdown scheduled for November 2nd in Shizuoka, which will do a WWE-like angle where Choshu forms a tag team with general manager Katsuji Nagashima, who has been around pro wrestling forever, with New Japan, and at 60, will be doing his first match. There is some reality as there is an internal dispute regarding Power and Choshu having no new ideas to get business going. Even this idea is a copy of Choshu's own angle that made him a superstar in 1982. They are doing it an angle playing off reality, as on October 24th in Yaita, Amori went to Nagashima and asked him for his money, since everyone is getting paid late or less than they are supposed to with the thing dying. Nagashima said he didn't have the money and he and Koshinaka started screaming about how they can't pay their bills without money and were about to attack Nagashima when Choshu ran in with a chair, allowing Nagashima to escape. The next night in Shirakawa, Amori saw Nagashima and started choking him until Choshu hit Amori with a chair shot. All Japan. The October 26th 31st anniversary show at Budokan Hall drew a legit 8,000 for the live pay-per-view event, announced at 12,800. Headlined by Toshiaki Kawada beating the debuting Don Fry to retain the Triple Crown in 1706. The match was built around Kawada constantly using the stretch plum Ms. Min finisher about 11 years ago, but Fry getting out of it. It was billed as the first open finger glove match in Triple Crown history, so punching was legal. Kawada did a lot of leg kicks while Fry did a lot of punching to the head. At one point Fry caught Kawada in a choke, but the ref stopped him saying that a choke is illegal in pro wrestling, which was the face saver. Kawada kept using high kicks and the stretch plum before the ref stopped the match, keeping Fry's gimmick of not ever tapping out, since he dislocated his elbow and had his shoulder torn out legit from not tapping to Hidehiko Yoshida in Pride last November. Overall, this was said to be a disappointing show, with the main event sort of saving it, as it was one of only two good matches. Both were hitting hard and the crowd liked it a lot. Kawada did not wear gloves, so people popped when he threw bare-knuckle punches to the head coming back from Fry's repeated punches. We got one report that Fry at one point was nailed with such a hard kick to the head that he forget his spots for the rest of the match, but it turned out okay. Fans wanted Fry to work more for All Japan after the bout because he did so well. It seemed the match was to put the stretch plum back over, as well as set up Kawada defending against Shinya Hashimoto. They had spent months building Hashimoto defending against Kawada when Hashimoto vacated the belt due to injuries. Hashimoto came to the ring after the match and issued a title challenge. Masa Fuchi then jumped into the ring and Hashimoto attacked Fuchi. Kawada then hit the ring for the save and said not to attack an old man and that he's been waiting for this match a long time. Kawada noted that because the next tour is the tag team tournament, they wouldn't be able to do the match until next year because he doesn't want to defend the title in 01. The feeling is if Hashimoto versus Kawada can't draw a good crowd at Budokan, that may be it for the building, which they are only planned on running 3 times next year at this point anyway. They have nothing on the horizon that could be a bigger match than that. To show how much the company has changed when it comes to planning and long-term, it is tradition at intermission during the anniversary show to announce all the teams in the tag tournament. Instead, no such announcement took place. Keiji Muto and Arashi retained the World Tag title over D'Lo Brown and Bull Buchanan in 24-26 when Muto pinned Brown with a moonsault after Brown had missed a moonsault. Told this match was so-so, and basically dragged as Brown and Buchanan didn't get over. Nobutaka Araya returned, having dropped a lot of weight, which he certainly could afford. He lost to Satoshi Kojima in 1638 to a lariat with the stip that if he lost, he would have to become tag team partner of Kojima. Match was said to have been a disappointment. Kendo Kashin retained the junior title over Dr. Wagner Jr. in 1632 with the flying armbar. Match was said to have been so-so. Silver King came to ringside wearing an identical mask. At one point, the two did a switch and King wrestled a little while against Kashin as the crowd screamed about it. The biggest disappointment was the Mask of Tiger, Satoru Sayama, match with early 80s rival Gran Hamada. Sayama, who turns 46 in a few weeks, was said to have been way too heavy and didn't move well as missed spots. A guy like Sayama, who made his rep being the fastest guy in the ring and best high flyer, isn't going to age as well in Japan as a guy who got over by not doing much but bleeding like Abdullah. Sayama got the pin in 11:28 with a diving headbutt. There was talk of trying to build a show around Kawada versus Sayama as a battle of legends, but I'm guessing that's out the window since Sayama didn't get over in what was also his All Japan debut. Sayama talked about a match with Kawada for the title and fans didn't like that at all, and then talked about wanting to fight more in All Japan, and nobody was thrilled with that either. The show stealer was said to have been the third match on the show, where Low-Ki pinned Silver King in 13:03 with the Phoenix Splash. All Japan is doing joint shows with Ring of Honor on December 27th in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania National Guard Armory and with Brandon Oliver and Jose Lothario's River City Wrestling on December 28th at the San Antonio Westside YMCA. The Ring of Honor show will feature Muto and Arashi defending their tag team titles against Dan Moff and Christopher Daniels, Kojima vs. Homicide, AJ Styles vs. Kaz Hayashi, which should be a great match, and Tomoaki Honma and Kazushi Miyamoto vs. Colt Cabana and CM Punk. The RCW show will have Muto and Arashi defending against a Texas wrestling superstar and Pete Lothario, Jose's son, plus Kojima vs. Crusher Kong, Hayashi vs. Homicide and Honma and Miyamoto vs. Biohazard and Blue Angel. Both shows will be taped for Samurai TV in Japan. Alan Funk, after his near-fatal facial injuries in Finland when Sonny Siaki's knee crushed his face on a moonsault, is actually talking about returning here on the January tour doing his Funkster gimmick, although many people are skeptical how he could wrestle seriously with 5 plates in his face. Ed Leslie did for years, but nobody could get near his face. Pro Wrestling Noah. Kenta Kobashi and Tama Honda retained the GHC tag titles, beating Akira Tao and Daisuke Ikeda in 31-29 when Honda used one of his submissions on Ikeda on October 24th in Hiroshima before a sellout 2,600 fans. On paper those guys going that long sounds scary, but Kobashi has pulled out more than one miracle this year. After the match, Yoshinari Ogawa laid out Kobashi with a belt shot. Also on that show, after Takashi Sugiura and Yoshinobu Kanemaru beat Michael Modest and Donovan Morgan, suddenly Geto, Jado and Katsushi Takemura from New Japan showed up to attack Sugiura and Kanemaru. It ended with Geto hanging Sugiura with a chain over the ropes to set up their GHC Junior title match on November 1st. On October 25th in Sasebo, when Ogawa and 2 Cold Scorpio beat Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi in the main event, Kobashi bladed himself for the first time in anyone's memory. He hadn't even had hardway juice in a match, which is amazing considering how brutal they work, in almost 5 years. Still, I'm sensing going to this Americanized booking too frequently will hurt more in the long run. The plan is to send wrestlers to Pro Wrestling Iron in California next year. This will be the old school style of how New Japan used to use Calgary and currently uses CMLL. It would be younger guys sent away for a few months so they can be brought back with a new look and maybe a new winning move, so they can be elevated fresh. One of the problems of the current style of guys staying in the same company for years without a break is the difficulty in elevating them, and this goes for all companies. October 5th TV report. Show was mainly about 16 minutes of a 30-minute draw with different partners than usual, with Mitsuharu Misawa and Tao and Takeshi Morishima versus Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Takeshi Rikyo. Looked to be a 3 stars half match. Misawa was really feeling it, including doing an elbow suicida, Tape ending with an elbow smash. Kobashi did a 30 seconds vertical suplex on Tao, who was a big guy to be doing that too. Good build and crowd was hot in the final minutes. Kobashi did a half Nelson German suplex on Misawa when time ran out. They showed about 4 minutes of a Kenta and Namichi Marufuji and Kotaro Suzuki versus Takashi Sugiura and Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Makoto Hashi match. What aired looked tremendous. It was super fast-paced, perfectly timed spots one after the other. It's not my favorite style, but the crowd was going nuts and it was incredible within its style. Hashi pinned Suzuki at the end with a form of a Michinoku driver. appeared to be excellent. October 12th was built around building up both a tag title and singles title match for later. It was Tao and Ikeda and Muhammad Yone over Kobashi and Honda and Kenna in 21:57. This was mainly to set up Tao and Ikeda's tag title shot. Tao and Honda looked pretty bad, although Tao worked harder than usual. Everyone else looked real good. At one point Tao started mocking Kobashi doing his million short chops in a row in the corner spot. Yone pinned Kenta with a move where he had him up like he was doing a fisherman buster, but then dropped him in a different manner. They really put over Ikeda in particular looking good with Kobashi and Honda, as they needed to. After the match, Yoshinari Ogawa attacked Kobashi to set up the November 1st GHC title match. He attacked Honda and Kobashi with chair shots, including a few on Kobashi's bad knee, and then put Kobashi in a half crab. Tao and Honda saved Kobashi, with the idea they didn't want him injured before their tag title match. Cold Scorpio and Richard Slinger came out to help Ogawa. Ogawa put Kobashi's ankle in a chair and Scorpio came off the top rope with a leg drop onto the chair. 3 stars half. Rest of the show was highlights of Juventud Guerrera over Suzuki. They pushed Kenta and Marufuji vs. Guerrera and Ricky Marvin for November 1st. This was edited to show a few highlight moves. At least what aired looked really good, as Guerrera showed his usual perfect timing. Finish saw him get the pin after a Cradle Michinoku driver, which is his new finisher, called the 911. October 5th TV did a 2.5 rating and October 12th did a 1.8. New Japan. The G1 Tag Team Tournament ends on October 30th at Korakuen Hall. Manabu Nakanishi and Yuji Nagata ended up tied with Hiroyoshi Tenzanando Samu Nishimura for second place, so they will have a singles match, with the winning team facing Yoshihiro Takayama and Toa, which won the round robin. To show how little interest there really is this year in the tournament, the final placings were decided on October 28th in Kamagane before just 1,500 fans. Nishimura and Tenzan, who were in first place with 9 points, picked up no points with a double countout with Tadao Yasuda and Makai Club. Both Kantaro Hoshino and Ryushi Yanagisawa interfered a lot to help Yasuda's team. Next was IWGP Tag Champs Yutaka Yoshi and Hiroshi Tanahashi, with 7 points against Takayama and Toa, with 8. Takayama pinned Tanahashi in 9 minutes with his knee, giving his team 10 points, for a win, 1 for a draw, but any kind of DQ draw is 0 points and putting them in first place. The final match was Nagata and Nakanishi, 7, versus Mike Barton and Jim Steele, 6. At this point, anything other than a Nagata and Nakanishi win would put Nishimura and Tenzan versus Toa and Takayama. Finish saw Nakanishi have Barton in the torture rack while Nagata had Steele in the Nagata lock and neither was getting out, so the ref stopped it at 19:14. The final round robin standings were 1. Takayama and Toa 10. 2. Tenzan and Nishimura and Nagata and Nakanishi 9. 4. Yoshi and Tanahashi and Yasuda and Makai 7. 6. Blue Wolf and Shinsuke Nakamura and Barton and Steele 6. 8. Masahiro Chono and Jushin Liger 2 because they had to forfeit so many matches when Chono injured his neck. Chono recently got a national award by an eyeglass company as Japan's best dressed celebrity. Some notes from the Tokyo Dome on October 13th. Hulk Hogan vs. Chono was a good match for the Japanese just because it was Hogan's first match in so many years and they were hungry to see him. If it was any other 2 people in the ring doing that match, it would have been considered pretty bad. I couldn't even compare it to Hogan vs. Rock in any way, as that was better and crowd heat was so much greater. You could see the match was simply Chono doing whatever Hogan wanted and just there to get Hogan over. It was very slow moving and some of Hogan's offense looked terrible. From a wrestling standpoint, I'd say it was the level of one of Hogan's WCW main event title matches. The only spot I could see where he may have hurt his right knee is it buckled in a weird way, taking a shoulder block off the top, and you could see he wasn't comfortable getting up on the right knee from the bump. Hogan did the stuff like in WCW where he took off his belt and whipped Chono and people largely laughed at the silliness of that in New Japan ring. It was smartly laid out using the spot from the 1983 Inoki match, since it had been pushed so hard on TV. Everyone popped for it, and especially when Chono started getting up from it. They loved the Hulk up spot near the end. Finish saw Chono use the STF, and when Hogan got out, Chono was posing, and Hogan popped up and gave him the Axe Bomber. The match was a success, but I'd go 1 1/2 star. The Junior Royal Rumble was 3 stars. Basic good match, probably not as good as you'd want with that much talent, but the juniors never get over big in the dome. The Team Inoki vs. Team New Japan was very good early, But 39:54 was too long and it dragged toward the end. Part of the problem is that New Japan is so much like 1999 WCW, in that the promotion is so cold that even the good stuff doesn't get over. This same match in Noah would be considered great, because the fans would be all over it. But New Japan killed its base by always having its guys job for outsiders who can't work. It was interesting that after introducing all 10 men, they played Inoki's music, and the place popped bigger than for anyone, including Hogan and Sap. And then there was no Inoki, and it was just the team music. I think because it dragged, I'd go maybe 2 3/4 stars, even though there was some very good stuff with Minoru Suzuki, who has become one of the best technical working wrestlers around, Shinsuke Nakamura and Tanahashi, who did great wrestling sequences with each other, and even Kazuyuki Fujita, whose work was good and pulled off a Hurricane Rana that popped the place. Late in the match, the place went nuts when Tanahashi gave Suzuki a German suplex, as Suzuki is able to work with the aura that he's real because his style is so believable. Sap was largely well protected and people loved seeing him in with Nagata, since Nagata can carry just about anyone. Sap could be such a superstar in old-school Japanese pro wrestling just based on his look and athletic ability. But the money isn't there for him. For some reason I thought it was funny when he started doing the headbutts, maybe because it was so retro. It's funny because even though they are totally different, it really feels like Pride is WWF of 1999 while New Japan is WCW, and guys like Suzuki, Nakamura, Fujita, Sap, Takayama, etc. in Pride are a huge deal, and here it's like they are stars, but it's New Japan, so people don't care that much. People were into Tenzan versus Takayama, and got mad when Sap eliminated both at the same time. Sap and Nakanishi worked some good spots, including Sap getting a choke and Nakanishi turning it into a torture rack. In the early minutes the place popped real big when Sap put on a gi that Seiji Sakaguchi brought out, and then they locked up and Sakaguchi threw him down twice judo style. Kazunari Murakami vs Katsuyori Shibata was very exciting because Murakami is such a believable brawler and Shibata is a young guy that people care about when he sells and bleeds. Shibata juiced a ton. This was another deal I couldn't understand because the people were just begging for a Shibata comeback and would have exploded, and none came and the ref just stopped it when Murakami was destroying him. Toa was terrible, but that's to be expected, although Makabe did a decent job trying to carry him. Toa was actually trained some time back in California at the UPW school long before he was brought into K1 as a gimmick monster. He is, however, legitimately a Samoan from New Zealand. In the shoot matches, Asami Shibuya vs Kalian Bold Batar nobody cared about. Tsuyoshi Kosaka vs Ricardo Moraes could have had interest except it was a boring match on ground with not much movement the whole time. Moraes has a great look for pro wrestling, but he's probably too old to learn. Josh Barnett vs Yoshiki Takahashi was a good match. The November 3rd Yokohama show will be on pay-per-view. Biggest show of the week was October 26th in Kobe before 5,500 fans. Main event saw Takayama and Toa beat Tenzan and Jushin Liger when Takayama pinned Liger after the knee. Nagata beat Nakamura quickly, while Suzuki beat Tanahashi in a match stemming from the Dome main event. A prelim match saw Tiger Mask vow to beat Geto, Jado and Katsushi Takemura in a row. He pinned Geto, and then pinned Takemura, but when faced with IWGP Junior Champ Jado, he submitted to the crossface. In the tag tournament on October 25th, when Yasuda and Makai Club I beat Takayama and Toa, a masked man Tatsutoshi Goto, came to the ring and gave Toa a backdrop on the floor and he was counted out. Takashi Fuke, who is the company's ring doctor, is the latest person from the pro wrestling world running for the national diet. Other Japan notes. In a case of major overkill, Bob Sapp has just agreed to work the November 2nd Michinoku Pro 10th year anniversary show at the Ariake Coliseum. That means he'll be doing 2 pay-per-view shows on successive days, since he's doing New Japan at Yokohama the next day. Worse, Sapp will be working a mid-card match teaming with prelim wrestler Tsubo Jinjin against Jinsei Shinzaki and unknown Chinen Hokai. The story is that Keiji Muto told Sadaharu Tanigawa that Sapp needs experience of working for a smaller promotion, but the last thing he needs now is needless overexposure to where his appearances become no big deal. Main event on the show is the original 10-year-old company feud with Great Sasuke vs Super Delphin, plus an old-school 6-man with Dick Togo and men's Teo and Shiryu, Kaz Hayashi under the mask, versus Shinzaki and Takamichi Noku, and Hanzo Nakajima, as well as Minoru Fujita vs Ikuto Hidaka. All Japan Women has major shows booked on December 9th at the Komazawa Olympic Gym in Tokyo and December 21st at Kawasaki Gym, here and there. Floyd Creechman, a former wrestler, manager and promoter in Montreal during the 80s with International Wrestling, passed away at the age of 46 on October 25 from Crohn's disease. Creechman was the son of the late Eddie Creechman, who managed the Sheik in the 70s after Ernie Roth became the Grand Wizard in WWF. Floyd Creechman started as a wrestler, managed by his father as Pretty Boy Floyd Creechman. He didn't make it as a wrestler, and like his father, turned to managing, mostly in Montreal, with people like Sweet Daddy Siki, Hercules Ayala, and Samu. He even feuded with his father during the dying days of Detroit wrestling. He did a Piper's Pit-like segment on the Montreal television during the mid-80s. He also briefly worked in Memphis under the name Leslie Floyd Creechman. Bret Hart was on Wrestling Observer Live this week, and when asked about making an appearance at WrestleMania, said Vince has left the door open to him, but he indicated he wasn't likely to happen. He said the stroke makes it impossible at times to control his emotions, and that doing the eulogy for his father was incredibly stressful, and the idea of having to give a speech at a sold-out Madison Square Garden may be too difficult. He also said that the stroke has impacted his response timing, which has made him shy away from doing any acting because he would come across as a bad actor. In the Stu Hart story from last week, the wrestler Hiroyagi, who was attacking the Fingers and biting Bret Hart in the dungeon, which caused Stu to go berserk in 1974, was not Goro Tsurumi, but Ryumago, whose real name is Hiroshi Yagi. He would have only been a year older than Bret, so he was 18 when the deal went down. Tsurumi was also in Calgary at about the same time, but used the name Ho Chi Lao. Yagi is the former wrestler, who was famous in Japan for once beating Tatsumi Fujinami for the WWF Junior Heavyweight title, holding it for 2 days in 1979, and was a masked man in Mid-South Wrestling and later the AWA, as Ninjago, and when he quit the promotion. Steve Olsenowski was put under the mask as pretended to be Japanese, which was quite hilarious at the time, in the mid-80s, before resurfacing in the mid-90s as this super cult babyface who ran his own promotion and defended Japan against the forces of various space aliens in battles over the Intergalactic Championship. He's now in jail for purse snatching in a subway incident we reported on months ago. The status of MLW is up in the air right now with the cancellation of the October 24th show in Jacksonville and no further dates scheduled, which naturally puts the future in serious question. The official term from owner Court Bauer is that they are reorganizing until the new year. The Sunshine Network was claiming that there are no new shows scheduled to air after October 27th, but was under the impression it would return on November 24th. The October 27th show was unintentionally funny, as Joey Styles was talking about all these things that happened in Jacksonville, that never happened, and started plugging in November 21st show in Orlando, which isn't taking place. He talked about a no DQ match with C.W. Anderson and Simon Diamond defending against Samoan Island Tribe on the next show, and the Barry Windham vs. Sabu match that didn't take place in Jacksonville. There is also talk of returning to TV with an empty arena match with Terry Funk vs. Steve Corino for the title, the scheduled Jacksonville main event. The company appears to have lost a ton of money with all the fly-ins. They were even flying the referee and ring announcer down to Florida from the Northeast, TV costs, and using so many different people on every show, even though they did draw well in Fort Lauderdale. The Jacksonville advance was said to be about 250 tickets, which isn't good, but for an indie show several days ahead, isn't embarrassingly bad either. What is believed to have been the first pro wrestling event in Italy since a 1993 WWF show was a CZW show on October 25th in Pistoia, before 800 fans. B-Boy beat Sonya Dutt in a ladder match. Trent Acid won 2-1 in a 20 minutes Iron Man match over Ruckus for the Iron Man belt. Nick Gage beat Nate Hatred in a 2 out of 3 fall tables match. Zandig beat Messiah to win the CZW title in a sick match, finishing with a power bomb off the top rope onto a ladder held in place by 2 chairs, which bent the hell out of the ladder. They used a lot of thumbtacks, which didn't get over. Wife Beater, who didn't even wrestle on the show, made the save with a weed whacker. Zandig apologized after the match for people who thought it was too violent. Harley Davidson sponsored the show with a big screen and professional lighting, and an Italian rock band played. The people there loved it. The first Ring of Honor drew 325 fans for its debut in northern New York, in Spencerport, near Rochester, on October 25th. Homicide beat Samoa Joe via STF and using a noose thrown in by manager Julius Smokes, which led to Joe passing out. It was a non-title match, to set up a title match. Teddy Hart missed the show. He was supposed to fly in from Florida after doing the MLW show, but it was canceled and there was no point in him flying in on Thursday as was scheduled since he'd have to miss his grandfather's funeral. So the decision was made not to bring him in since the cost would have been $1,500 and he'll be coming in late November. So John Walters took his place, winning a 4-way over Justin Credible, Jimmy Rave and Colt Cabana when Walters made Credible tap to the sharpshooter. even though had lost earlier in the show to Christopher Daniels, Walters in being given a strong push. Steve Corino drew CM Punk in what was reported as good by some and excruciatingly boring by others. The pre-match went on forever as Corino listed about 100 wrestlers who were heavy drinkers like himself, and who chased women including Murdoch, Brody, Hansen, Race, Destroyer, who was neither a heavy drinker nor womanizer, Bob Sweeten, Magnum TA, every name got a pop. But Brody's was the biggest, which shocked everyone since he's been dead for 15 years and this was an upstate New York crowd. Punk then listed about 100 drugs that he abhors. Even those who loved mentioning the old names and Corino's mic work conceded that it killed the show for the majority of the fans. Izzy and Dixie of Special K kept the tag titles over Locke and DeVito. Not only did Izzy and Dixie blade, but so did several Special K members at ringside. It was said there were 6 people running around ringside bleeding, which made the match mean nothing. All reports we got indicated it was strong show. As things stand right now, Low Ki is done with Ring of Honor. Last week, he contacted Booker Gabe Sapolsky and said he wanted to finish up and was willing to put everyone over on the way out. Sapolsky, who is kind of a Paul Heyman disciple, goes by the Heyman belief that if a guy is leaving, you have him do one job that means something, because having everyone beat him on the way out ends up meaning nothing, and fans shit on it because they figure it out. Sapolsky wanted him to lose to Homicide on November 1st, and then he was going to finish up working 2 more dates in November. Low Ki wrote back, after Sapolsky had started advertising Low Ki vs. Homicide as the main event for Elizabeth, saying he wanted to just do a 15-minute draw. Sapolsky didn't want to do a draw, and the 15-minute time limit for the main event wouldn't fly, so he said no. Without any more contact, Low Ki put on his website that due to a commitment that came up in Japan, he would be off the November 1st show in Elizabeth. Nobody from Ring of Honor has actually heard a thing from Low Ki, and I'm of the impression he flew home on October 27th, after the All Japan Budokan show. Homicide faces BJ Whitmer on that show. Jim Cornette is so adamant about not flying that he's driving from Louisville to Elizabeth. Indie pro wrestler Lyle Lee Mayhew, who wrestles as Jack Diamond, the champion of the Huntsville, Bay Southern Wrestling Alliance, is charged with sexual assault against a female inmate at the jail he formerly worked with. Mayhew was arrested on October 16 after admitting sexual contact with a female employee, and the Chattanooga Times Free Press reported the first alleged victim as well as a second alleged victim pass a lie detector test claiming an unwanted sexual assault took place at around the same time. Mayhew, 47, is charged with sexual assault and sodomy, and is free on $40,000 bond. He's accused of forcing oral sex and inappropriately touching the woman on October 11th, while he was cleaning up the cell block after a flood that the woman had caused. Sheriff Phil Summers of the Catoosa County Detention Center said the sexual contact appeared to have been consensual, and that the woman initiated it. Ken Poston, the attorney for the woman, denied it, and had testimony from 3 women who claimed Mayhew sexually assaulted them. Poston said, there is suspicion that heavy steroid use might explain some of the aggressive behavior toward the female inmates. Promoter Don Hall said he would continue to use Mayhew on his Saturday night shows, saying that as long as his personal life doesn't interfere with business, he has no problem. Another arrest that made local headlines was Winnipeg pro wrestler John DeCamara, Johnny Wise Guy of Real Action Wrestling, who was sent to prison for cocaine trafficking. He had been arrested in June of 2002 for 34 half grams of rock cocaine and 1 8-ball. His 2 cell phones he had on him continued to ring as he was being booked. DeCamara's excuse to police was that he had come back from a tour of Nova Scotia and all his utilities had been turned off. He was forced to sell drugs to make money so they could be turned back on. Boy, that excuse will get you everywhere. Even worse, police were madder at their intelligence being insulted since he'd also been arrested in July 2001 with both rock cocaine and an 8-ball. He was fined $1,500 after plea bargaining down to a possession charge. UPW has had some big names both in and out of wrestling do angles and are scheduled for appearances on upcoming shows. Evan Marriott of Joe Millionaire fame, who trained at the school years ago, appeared at the October 22nd show at the Galaxy Theater, which drew 220 fans. He first cut a heel promo blaming Rick Baseman and Tom Howard for keeping him from getting a WWE contract. They were negotiating for him to appear at Mania last year, but Marriott wouldn't agree with their creative plans at the time. However, he turned face at the end of the show and helped Howard beat Adam Pearce to win the UPW title in the main event. Another angle involved Predator from 0-1 and Ken Shamrock. They cut promos back and forth to set up a match on the return show, which is December 17th, billed as the company's 5th anniversary show. Also scheduled for that show is Howard vs. Sting, who Baseman originally discovered, as the main event, plus a three-way with light heavyweight champ Frankie Kazarian versus Mikey Henderson versus Low-Ki. Roddy Piper was scheduled to do a Piper's Pit at the show, and the small crowd with Piper build says a lot. Piper pulled out the day before, claiming it was due to the deaths of Stu Hart and Hawk. Tony Halme was indicted on charges including a firearms violation, DUI, drug use and important and illegal substance, steroids, and goes on trial in a few weeks in the aftermath of the accidental shooting incident he was involved with in July. He's still a member of Parliament and plead not guilty to all charges. Since old issues of The Observer made reference to Randy Orton at age 13 and Dwayne Johnson starting from high school and many times in college, this may be another one. Dusty Dvoracek, the starting nose tackle at the University of Oklahoma, who was a huge Von Erichs fan as a kid, has talked with starting defensive tackle Dan Cody as going into pro wrestling together as a tag team when their football careers end. Lots of people talk about it, but the fact Dvoracek is a 3.5 GPA student and plays for University of Oklahoma, which has Jim Ross on the sidelines most games. This means he's got a pretty strong if he really wants to pursue it, as Ross is pretty high on real athletes with good GPAs with the idea it shows responsibility and drive. Sports Illustrated had a couple of wrestling references in the October 27th issue when running down sports in Hawaii. It mentioned Dwayne Johnson attended McKinley High in Honolulu for 2 years. In a list of Hawaii's all-time greatest athletes, they mentioned Russ Francis, although didn't mention pro wrestling or his family. Francis wrestled for several years, mainly in the AWA, Hawaii and Oregon, and was considered a strong prospect for stardom, but was a legit NFL star with the New England Patriots as one of the league's best tight ends. His father, Edmund Francis, was a famous wrestler who for years promoted in Hawaii and was World Junior Champ when that title meant something. His brother, Billy Francis, also wrestled for years. Russ was a college football star in Oregon and actually quit after his junior year and spent a year wrestling before he could be drafted by the NFL. At that time your college class had to graduate to be eligible. He often teamed with Greg Gagne before the High Flyers days. He ended up in San Francisco with the 49ers at the end of his career and worked a few matches in 1987, including one that drew 9,000 fans to the Cow Palace for the almost dead AWA, largely based on all the local media hype that he'd be wrestling on the show. It was so successful, they brought their biggest show of the year, Super Clash, an ESPN taping, to the Cow Palace, figuring his being on the card would make it a bigger crowd than they could get elsewhere. It ended up the night Kurt Hennig beat Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA title, but Francis was actually, to the fans, the biggest star on the card. It only drew 2,800 as Francis and Jimmy Snuka beat the Terrorist, Brian Knobbs under a hood, and the Mercenary, Ron Fuller under a hood. Anyway, the brief mentioned Francis' prowess in baseball, good enough in high school to get drafted by the Royals, and the javelin, set a high school national record, which is a funny story. He had bad technique when he set a record, and then he was given coaching to give him better technique so he would be an Olympic hopeful. Once he learned proper technique, he could no longer throw far. Regarding Ole Anderson's book, I'm told it is very controversial and he doesn't hold back on a lot of people, and is particularly harsh on a lot of people in WCW management. Lance Russell came out on this past weekend's Memphis TV show as a surprise, and also did a taped interview with Rocky Johnson, talking about his son's movies. They did an angle to set up a Johnson, 62 years old, versus Mabel match. Jimmy Hart came out with a 16 magazine with his photo in it that would have been close to 40 years ago when he was with the Gentrys. The next Mid-South Coliseum show will be November 29th, called A Fight Fit for a King, which will be Lawler's 54th birthday, and everyone who attends gets free autographed photos, and Lawler claims Sports Illustrated would be there. Mike Lockwood, Crash Holly, is moving from the Carolinas back to San Francisco and will work as an instructor for Pro Wrestling Iron. Florida Today on October 26th ran a piece on Jim Myers, George the Animal Steel. Myers, 66, has lived in a retirement condo in Cocoa Beach for the past 14 years. It talked about his dual life through most of his career as a pro wrestler every summer and a high school football coach in at Madison Heights High School in a Detroit suburb. Steele revealed he would use a ton of breath mints for his famed green tongue. He was a defensive tackle at Michigan State who had a pro offer from the Buffalo Bills during the early days of the AFL. He was recruited into wrestling in the early 60s, and to keep his identity unknown, often worked around Detroit under a mask as the student, while he was a headliner in the Northeast during the summer. At the same time, he earned a master's degree in 1972. He's in the Michigan High School Sports Hall of Fame for his work as a coach, which he retired from in the 80s when he was making so much money in WWF that it was ridiculous to continue coaching. At his home, he keeps more souvenirs of his life as a football coach than of George Steele, but said that wrestling was a great part-time job. I'm telling you. Steve Moko of the University of Iowa, the 2001 and 2002 NCAA heavyweight champion, he lost in the 2000 finals as a freshman to Brock Lesnar, is taking a year off school to attempt to make the 2004 Olympic team in freestyle. Ahmed Johnson brought a set of Hawks spiked shoulder pads out at the beginning of the October 25th Professional Championship Wrestling show in Arlington, Texas, and put it in a trophy case on display in the arena lobby. NWA TNA poll for the October 22nd show was 41 thumbs up, 100%, 0 down and 0 in the middle for the best show since the X Division tournament show. Best match was Jeff Jarrett's NWA title win over AJ Styles with 30, and worst was the tag title with Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger over Danny During and Roadkill with 16, and Conan and BG James and Ron Killings versus Ikmo and Sonny Siaki Joe Legend with 9. It has to be considered a very bad sign to have a below-average response level for a match that was built up for 4 weeks. Jarrett Styles was a good match, with a lot of big moves. It was sort of a double turn during the match, even though Jarrett played heel in the angle with Jimmy Hart earlier in the show. Jarrett had Styles in the figure 4 when Siaki tried to interfere. Eric Watts blocked the ring, and then Dusty Rhodes came out and gave Siaki the bionic elbow, and took him away from the ring with his bull rope. By the end, Jarrett turned heel and used a belt shot for the win. This was kind of silly, because Watts was there when it happened, and in the previous match with AMW versus the Naturals, when the Naturals cheated to win due to outside interference of Glenn Gilberti, Watts ordered the match to continue and AMW ended up winning clean. This appeared to be a show written by Dutch Mantel and Jarrett, as a lot of the Russo influence seemed gone. The building wasn't quite sold out, but there were about 1,250 in, and the paid attendance from early lines appeared to be 40%. It was the best paid attendance for a show in a while. Still, the last time they spent a month building to a match, which was the Jarrett Raven NWA title match, the reaction was triple the usual levels. They teased the idea Piper would be returning, as Don Callis said that even though Russo was gone, he didn't want Piper back. Gilberti is now using a tennis racket with NWA written on it, which is meant as a spoof of Jim Cornette. This was Gilberti's idea. After Sonjay Dutt made such a strong impression in his debut on October 15th, he was booked to look like a total geek on October 22nd. Not only did he lose cleanly to Kid Cash, then get the post-match beatdown from Cash to set up the Abyss save, but after that, he started hugging Abyss like he was his buddy, so Abyss laid him out with a black hole slam. And they'll wonder when he does all his cool moves in a few weeks, why nobody takes him seriously. They are teasing problems with Siaki and Trinity, as she gave him a missile drop kick which led to 3 Live crew beating Siaki and Ikmo and Joe Legend. While Russo's name was mentioned all over the show, the story is that it was because it was part of the storyline how Styles would wrestle without Russo, and that his name will be phased out for a while from here. Jimmy Hart got one of the best reactions anyone has gotten in the history of the company when he first came out. Before he went to WWF in the mid-80s, Hart was the regular manager in the Memphis territory, which ran every Saturday night at the fairgrounds. So he'd be something of an old-time area legend. D'Lo Brown and Jerry Lynn are both off television right now as part of the Callis angle. At least Brown, who Callis got rid of, is in Japan this month, whereas Lynn is there every week but not appearing in front of the camera. Jarrett missed an announced NWA title match for the Wildside group on October 25th. AJ Styles appeared on the show. Bill Behrens opened the show playing a video of Jarrett saying he's not coming anywhere near Cornelia, Georgia, until Styles proves himself. The show itself drew a sellout of 180 fans and was said to be a great show. The fact the fans weren't all that upset about the bait and switch is both a compliment to the crew as well as statement of the value of the NWA title and Jarrett these days. Callis was one of 29 students that graduated with MBAs from Asper Business College at the University of Manitoba on October 22nd. Callis, when ECW and WCW Eric Bischoff was going to hire him as a new announcer when he was preparing to take over the company, went down in 2001, started studying for his MBA because he never wanted to be left in the position he was in, where he didn't have good career options outside wrestling. Ron Harris has quit the promotion to work as a bodyguard for Savage on the tour, which is why Don Harris back to his babyface security guard role, which makes no sense since he turned heel from that role already. MMA, Kazushi Sakuraba is going to honor Hawk on the November 9th show by dressing as a road warrior when he comes to the ring for his match with Kevin Randleman. He actually dressed like Animal for a match maybe a year ago. He always comes out in a pro wrestler gimmick from his childhood. I remember Vader, Mil Mascaras, and Great Kabuki. It's so funny watching the American broadcast because Boss Rutan and Steven Quadros weren't wrestling fans, even though Rutan made one of the best transitions to pro wrestling of any fighter and never had a clue what he was doing. The complete lineup for the show has been finalized. The show will open with Gary Goodridge versus Dan Bobish of WJ. Goodridge is the better striker, but Bobish is the better wrestler, and at 330 pounds, may be one of the few guys who is as strong or stronger than Goodridge. The match is very important to Bobish, because he's being pushed as WJ's monster. The fact he's taking this risk in such a high-profile show also shows how much trouble WJ is in, but if Goodridge should win, it'll hurt Bobish's career. Then they'll do Quinton Jackson versus Chuck Liddell. Can you imagine that as the second match on a card? Then Wanderlei Silva versus Hidehiko Yoshida. Next is Dan Henderson versus Murilo Bustamante. Bustamante versus Henderson is basically an alternates match, where if the winner of the Jackson-Liddell or Silva-Yoshida matches can't continue on, then the Bustamante-Henderson winner would go to the finals. Really, Bustamante versus Henderson, because both are guys who should compete at 185, is a higher class of match than even Liddell versus Jackson, and I'd favor Bustamante, but either could win. Either of them would be giving up a lot of size and strength if they were to go on, but both are super tough guys who would likely be able to go the distance and be damn competitive in the process. Bustamante hung with Jackson and made him look mortal, and that was with about a week's worth of preparation. Next is Heath Herring versus Norihisa Yamamoto. That should be a strong win for Herring, who apparently they are trying to rebuild. There had been a lot of talk of Herring versus Kazuyuki Fujita, which would have been a tougher match for Herring. Next is Sakuraba versus Randleman, followed by Mirko Cro Cop versus Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira for the Pride Interim World Heavyweight title. The main event will be the finals of the Grand Prix, making this perhaps the strongest MMA lineup in history. Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitta, Frank Fertitta and Randy Couture from UFC are all scheduled to attend the November 9th show. Most likely Couture will issue a challenge to whomever wins the Grand Prix. Lorenzo hasn't been to a Pride show since the first Silva vs. Sakuraba match soon after they bought the company. Francois Botha was reportedly paid $500,000 by K1 for that 15 seconds fight with Cyril Abidi on October 11th. Wes Sims suffered a broken arm in training, so his match with Frank Mir on the November 21st UFC pay-per-view is off. The replacement will be Patrick Smith, who is an interesting character. He lost to Ken Shamrock in seconds on November 12, 1993 in the first ever UFC in Denver. He hadn't fought in more than 4 years before scoring a win on October 18 over Alan Sullivan. His 9-11 record includes something like 8 losses via submission, and Mir is one of the best heavyweights in the world at submission. K1 has a middleweight show on November 18 at Budokan with Genki Sudo versus Albert Kraus, plus Dwayne Ludwig and Takahiro Murahama fighting. The planned main event is Masato versus Julio Garcia, who is billed as ranked number 7 in boxing by the IBF in his weight division. The gimmick they are running is that Garcia is being sent to take out Masato by Sugar Ray Leonard. K1 is also negotiating with boxer Andrew Galota. It appears the odds are now great against Mike Tyson fighting in K1. Sadaharu Tanigawa said there is no chance of it happening this year because there isn't adequate time to promote it, but he hoped to get Tyson next year. Because the December 6th Tokyo Dome tournament is so weak, he's attempting to put together a match with Botha against either Mark Hunt or Jerome LeBanner, as well as an MMA rules match with Sapp on the show. The K1 show from Las Vegas on August 8 aired in Europe on October 27. Will Vanders, who I haven't heard, but from numerous accounts is probably the worst announcer around, identified Michael Jordan as Dr. Dre. Then, when the real Dr. Dre was shown on the screen, he said, "That might well be Dr. Dre." Mirko Cro Cop, when asked about Tim Sylvia, called him the MMA version of Jan the Giant Norkia, a huge guy who is more of a gimmick than a great fighter. Cro Cop said after he beats Nogueira and Fedor Emelianenko, that he wants to go to UFC and win the heavyweight title there in 2004. Kazuyuki Fujita will probably debut in the January UFC show. A huge MMA show scheduled for November 1st in Seoul, South Korea was cancelled apparently due to government intervention. Vale Tudo has become hugely popular on television, and I guess someone from the government saw it and thought it was nothing more than a street fight and had the sport banned. WWE, the big wedding took place on October 25th at St. Teresa of Avila Catholic Church in Sleepy Hollow, New York, before a mostly classy and sedate crowd of about 90% people from wrestling and a group of uninvited wrestling fan spectators kept by 14 police officers about a half block away. Stephanie wore an ivory gown with a fitted bodice, moderate train, and Triple H wore a simple black tux. Mick Foley was quoted in the Westchester Times as saying the wedding was excellent, better than his own wedding. The reporter was actually not at the ceremony, but waiting outside. The reception, held at the Dolce Tarrytown House, had no reporters. The hotel was blocked off so nobody without an invitation got in, and only guests of the wedding were able to get rooms at the place to keep wrestling fans away from everyone. The WWE camera crew were taping both the wedding and the reception, no doubt for the I'm All Grown Up Now DVD on Stephanie. That was a joke, by the way. Levesque's dad, who was also his best man, gave a really nice toast, wishing them a lifetime of love and of kids, and a lot of people were caught off guard because he spoke from the heart in a very different way than people in WWE are used to hearing. Vince gave a classic Vince speech. Later, Michael Hayes made a complete fool of himself. He got on the mic and started singing Jailhouse Rock, which made a lot of people uncomfortable. About 15 minutes later, he tried to get on stage and sing again. The band was mad enough they wouldn't play for him, so he started singing on his own to Steph and Paul. He started swearing on stage, trying to be funny, until Linda walked up, took the mic from him and said, "Thank you, Michael." Hayes just kept saying that a free bird is a free bird while his wife took him upstairs. It was described that he turned a really nice evening from something totally first class into making people feel for a moment like they were at a wrestling circus and made people feel bad. Triple H's wedding party, besides his father, were Shane McMahon, Michaels, Nash, Regal, and Mark Calloway. Sean Waltman wasn't there. Stephanie's wedding party included sister-in-law Marissa and Sarah Calloway, along with non-wrestling friends. Hollywood sources on Triple H: there is not a buzz, but a small hum about Triple H. My take is that he'll get everyone's attention right now because of Rock's success, so if he does take off, everyone can say they knew it all along. If he fails, they'll run. Rock has cooled off because most people predicted the rundown would do Scorpion King business and it came nowhere close, and hasn't even covered the marketing money. Triple H vs. Goldberg was announced as the main event for Survivor Series, although Triple H's groin and hamstring injuries are serious enough that he won't be 100%. I think, as with the last time he had the groin injury and was in worse shape before the SummerSlam pay-per-view, come showtime, he's there. Unfortunately, he's also probably going to have the match go too long as well. Goldberg is scheduled to return from his current injury angle on the November 3rd show in Cleveland, as we continue the bone-breaking angles that heal in 2 weeks. Also announced thus far are Vince vs. Undertaker in a Buried Alive match, Shane vs. Kane and a loser has to go out in an ambulance match. Doesn't that sound like the dying days of WCW? Dudley's and RVD and Booker T vs. Jericho and Christian and Steiner and Henry in the Team Austin vs. Team Bischoff elimination match where if Austin's team wins, he doesn't have to be provoked to beat people up. But if Bischoff's team wins, then Austin is done as general manager and Molly Holly vs. Lita for the women's title. There will also be a SmackDown elimination match with Benoit and Angle and Bob Holly and APA vs. Lesnar and Cena and Show and Nathan Jones and Matt Morgan, which I'm guessing will be done to set up Benoit pinning Lesnar at some point to establish Benoit as a legit title contender, or else somebody else will pin Lesnar. But the idea would seem to be to set up a contender for Royal Rumble, as the feeling was nobody has been positioned ready for a pay-per-view title shot this month, and probably Basams vs. Guerreros in a tag title rematch. UPN will be airing a 1-hour special called The Stone Cold Truth on the Life of Austin, including interviews about his non-wrestling life with his ex-wives and children, on November 26th, to help promote the book. The book was number 76 on the Amazon.com charts on its first day of official release on October 28th, which is the highest any wrestling book has done in a long time. The Lita book with all the recent pub and good word of mouth has actually gone up to number 749. Austin has done a lot of media already, and will be doing more. He's in more than one place said, when asked about the declining business, saying the house show decline is due to September 11th. I don't know if guys say this because they think they need something to say to defend business or they really mean it, but that is so ridiculous. In March 2002, 6 months after September 11th, the WWE, running roughly the same number of dates per month it runs now, averaged 8,565 per show. Last month the company averaged 3,753 per show, well under half. The NBA, MLB, NFL, NHL, etc. have had no significant decline in attendance, only WWE, and most of the decline has taken place long after September 11th, although the fall itself started really at the end of 2000 shortly after Chris Kresge left as head writer and was replaced by Stephanie McMahon, and the drop is close to 70%, and October may end up being worse than September. Since the rundown was a box office disappointment, the marketing department is now attempting to sell it as an Indiana Jones adventure movie for overseas as opposed to a cool comedy. In fact, the new movie poster, which gives Rock and Sean William Scott almost equal billing, looks almost like an old Indiana Jones poster. After 32 days of release after October 27th, The movie was number 14 over the past weekend, was $1,003,900 in ticket sales for a total of $46,262,660 at press time. The Raw streak ended at 2, as the October 27th show in Fayetteville fizzled about halfway through. Show opened with Evolution, which now includes Batista, coming out. They claimed Goldberg's career was over and Orton said they should just give the belt back to Triple H. Bischoff came out and said he was stripping Goldberg of the belt, but before he could go any farther, Austin came out. Austin said that Goldberg assured him he'd face Triple H for the title at Survivor Series. In probably the most illogic reactions, Flair and Evolution went berserk. Let's see, they're giving Triple H a title shot at a guy who supposedly can't walk, and they were acting like they were double-crossed. Well, it was the only way to get it over, but it made zero sense. Batista was so mad he confronted Austin and told him he'd be next. Cade and Jindrak, who should be nicknamed the Oranges, Orange Trunks and Orange Tans, except most fresh fruits have more charisma, attacked Flair and Orton. Lita and Trish were half undressed backstage talking about guys. Trish was glowing because Jericho left a message on her cell phone. Lita thought Jericho and Christian were up to no good. Booker pinned Rico in 137 with an axe kick. No good camera shots of Jackie Gata. Jericho came out and cut a promo on Booker, calling him Mr. T. Steiner, and Christian came out and went to attack Booker as the cage above the ring very slowly came down. RVD waited forever, but still managed to get in before the cage totally lowered, and cleaned house with a chair shot. Henry beat Storm in 46 seconds via DQ and Henry wasted Storm, but Michaels ran in and gave him a super kick. Before the match, Teddy Long blamed Austin on them not getting the $100,000 because he kicked them out of the building. You would think they should be mad at Evolution because they wouldn't pay up, since both guys voluntarily walked away last week and left Goldberg laying. Everything is Austin's fault. Well, it makes sense as later in the show Henry joined Team Bischoff. Hurricane and Heidenreich beat Conway and Dupree in 5:55 of a very good match with great heat. Since Fayetteville is in the center of several military bases, they gave away free tickets to people in uniforms, and in this case, we're going to exploit them for heat as much as possible. Conway and Dupree were booed, and they are turning into a hell of a team. I can't get over how much Conway has improved this year, as has Dupree. Hurricane did a good job selling most of the match, and the crowd was totally with Heidenreich's comeback. Conway's work was so good he made Heidenreich look good, and Heidenreich pinned him after a wedgie rock bottom, and then did the same move to Dupree after the bout. Shane beat Test. Test came out on crutches, but is actually already cleared to wrestle, believe it or not. They teased that Kane would be facing Shane, and Test kept screaming for Kane to come out. Kane never arrived. This match dragged forever, with Test limping around. It was no DQ, so they worked it garbage style. Shane won in 6:24 with the Van Terminator, but between the match and his interview, it seemed like 30 minutes and the show never recovered. Shane gave a promo ripping on Kane, who finally came out, and they set up the loser goes out in an ambulance match. Lita won a four-way for the SS title shot over Trish, Kim, and Victoria. Earlier in the show, Lita went to see Christian, who sort of hit on her, and she sort of let him down easy, and he sort of indicated he was going to keep trying. Stratus was real good here. Lita got the pin in 2:51 with a DDT. Coach did a book review of Austin's book, saying it was all lies. Austin came out and basically said after his team wins, he wants Coach to interview him so he can beat him up. They announced Michaels versus Henry as next week's main event. At least they are trying to make life challenging for Michaels. Cade and Jindrak beat Flair and Orton in 3:17 when Jindrak pinned Flair after Maven interfered and totally missed what was supposed to be a clothesline as Flair had Jindrak in a rolling reverse. Batista came out and Evolution destroyed Cade and Jindrak and Maven afterwards. It blows my mind that they take the worst guys in OVW, and not only bring them up, but push them. Then, in the trivializing title changes department, or what a company that is going down the wrong path always does, they changed the IC title twice. First, Jericho beat Van Dam to win it in 4:23 with the walls. Bischoff came out and distracted ref Earl Hebner, who missed RVD making the ropes. Jericho brought him to the center, and finally RVD tapped. Austin came out and ordered an immediate rematch in a cage. This was a good match, ending when Van Dam climbed out and Jericho was about to go through the door. Van Dam kicked the door shot into Jericho's head, and Jericho bled, with Van Dam hitting the floor to regain the belt in 6:01. Jericho with his 6-minute title reign tied the all-time record of 6 IC title reigns with Jeff Jarrett. RVD now has 5, And nobody cares about any of that because when you change belts too often, they don't mean a thing. SmackDown taping from October 28th in Atlanta. Helix Skipper got a tryout match. Skipper went for his rope walk Hurricane Rana, but the problem is, his opponent was Horseshoe, and he's not of that level. Horseshoe was put over since he's the one under contract. Noble and O'Hare got a tryout as a tag team. Canyon's luck continues, since he was putting Jordan over on Velocity. SmackDown started with Vince ordering Heyman to destroy Undertaker. Benoit and Angle beat Cena and A-Train. Benoit pinned A-Train after a diving headbutt. It was about time he used that move as a finisher. Cena and A-Train started arguing afterwards. Cena gave A-Train a low blow and FU, and it appeared to be the start of a Cena face turn. It was inevitable, but I think he was due a stronger heel push before going face. Benjamin and Haas beat FBI in a 2-on-3. Benjamin and Haas worked as the faces with the idea Heyman has it out for them. Heyman brought out Matt Morgan and Nathan Jones as a new giant heel tag team. Good to see they see the OVW reports about how much charisma as a face Morgan has. And most importantly, that he's not ready in the ring for the big leagues. Nobody has patience. Big guy equals money even if they stink, I guess, which is half of what got us here. Lesnar and Show came out to confront them, but Heyman basically said this is business and ended his feud with Lesnar, and offered Morgan and Jones as Lesnar and Show's partner at Survivor Series. That's great, the only thing Jones has going for him is size, and really that's the only thing that has Morgan stand out, so they'll debut on a tag team with Show where nobody can look big. They aired another babyface video package on Bob Holly, which we covered last week, and another pushing the debut of another babyface wrestler, Ernest Miller. Dragon pinned Mysterio due to interference from Tajiri. Sakota and Yang were there with Tajiri, and they are calling them the Yakuza, Japanese Mafia. Tajiri wasn't exactly thrilled with that name for the group. They did a Halloween trick or treat deal with Wilson and Don Murray. Wilson won a pose down. Then Marie jumped into a tub of chocolate bobbing for apples, and took her top off, but was all covered with chocolate. It ended with Wilson pushing Taz into the chocolate, suit and all. Lesnar confronted Cena about being the fifth member of the team. Cena didn't seem to care and teased a face turn. Chavo was running down Eddie for his losses, but Eddie did it's not about being knocked down, it's about getting up. Basams attacked Eddie. Chavo didn't come out until they had beaten Eddie down, and didn't go after the Basams. Basams beat Rikishi and Scotty doing a switch and pin on Scotty. Heyman told Eddie he would have a handicap match next week on SmackDown against the Basams, and if he won, then he and Chavo would get a return match at Survivor Series. APA vs. Show and Lesnar ended with Lesnar hitting both APA dudes with a chair. Farouk got destroyed by Lesnar and Show, and it may be an injury angle to get him out of there. Angle and Benoit came in for the save and they were laying out Lesnar and Show until Morgan and Jones laid out Angle and Benoit with big boots, with Morgan powerbombing Angle and Jones giving Benoit a Dr. Bomb to end the show. Well, hope you guys enjoyed all the great SmackDown main events over the past 18 months. Notes from the October 23rd SmackDown show. Show was fine, but where everything is going didn't look nearly as good. Plus one can question the booking of the main event. A few corrections from the report we got at Deadline last week. In the Guerreros vs. Basams title change, the finish saw Eddie kick Shaniqua, and behind his back, Danny switched with Doug. So it was Danny who hit Eddie with the pipe and won the title in 7:56. It was a very good match since Eddie was on fire. Chavo walked out on Eddie after the match, so they are really going through with that program, which will move Eddie down to about second match level. Doug Basham, who has done some of the best promo work of anyone in wrestling this year, and nobody who has seen WWE would have a clue, was given a post-match promo of about 5 words here. Heyman showed up and he's lost probably 30 pounds. Rikishi showed up and he looks to have gained about 60 pounds, almost all in the gut and ass. Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty got a big reaction as the SmackDown version of the Dudleys, who will build matches around building to their spots, Worm and the Stinkface, and will always get big pops doing so, but mean nothing for ratings, not that anyone at that level does, it's just that the pops mean nothing. In the post-match attack on Gowan by Sakota and Yang, they did what was basically a double-team rock bottom on Gowan, and on their first televised attempt, botched it and Gowan wound up with a legit concussion. Wonder what Dinsmore is thinking. When Benoit and Angle went at it to start their new program, it appeared Benoit is going to play heel since he bailed out of the ring and pointed to his head like he was the smart guy. In the Undertaker vs. Lesnar and Show handicap match, the finish of the fourth fall was Undertaker pinning Lesnar, not Show, with a chain shot. He potatoed Lesnar legit, as Lesnar was knock loopy, although he did get up and do the F5 on the floor and won't be missing any matches. You pretty much have to break Lesnar's bones to get him to miss a shot. This booking was so ridiculous, having a guy beat both your US and world champion in 4 straight falls in a handicap match, especially since it started okay, but came across was rushed when fall 3 was 11 seconds and fall 4 was 42 seconds. Also, and I feel very strongly about this as a booking rule, to protect the championship, the world champion should never lose a fall to anyone unless it's directly to lead to a championship shot. Here you had Undertaker pinning the champion, when he just as easily could have pinned Show, and turning down the title shot to get at McMahon. The result is the champion is weakened, losing 4 straight falls, and it's not even to build him up. The last plan I'd heard from McMahon versus Undertaker in the Buried Alive match is that McMahon wins with oodles of interference, and Undertaker is buried alive. He then takes several months off, only to resurface before WM20 doing the old dead man gimmick, which is why Lesnar kept referring to him in promos as the Dead Man, for a match with Kane. They also did a gimmick of Noble doing an interview through a webcam, so it had the stalls and stuff in it, saying Nydia would be out for a while. That almost sounds like a code word for more plastic surgery coming. I've heard an unofficial boob job is in the works, which, if true, would be at least number 3 for her by the age of 24. In the Lumar Incorporated settlement with WWE regarding the Owen Hart wrongful death for $9 million, the entire out-of-court settlement was paid by Lumar's insurance company. Lumar wrote a funny press release claiming that they were vindicated because the $9 million they settled out of court for was less than half of the $18 million WWE was asking. Arthur McMillan, the Lumar CEO, said, "The decision to settle was made by our insurers based on their own commercial considerations. It is in no way an admission of liability by our company." He said using the shackle by WWE for the stunt was a gross misuse of a product designed for specific sailing applications, and that there was no jury finding that the shackle was defective, because it didn't get that far. What apparently caused the settlement, according to WWF attorney Craig O'Dear, was the judge ruling that Jerry McDevitt, the WWE attorney, could testify as a witness and tell jurors his version of why Martha Hart dismissed Lumar as a defendant, as well as the judge's allegations that it was a fraud. Lumar then requested going into settlement talks. Paul Wickens, Lumar's lead attorney, denied that story, saying he wanted to keep McDevitt's testimony out of the case because it would cloud the real issues, saying it had nothing to do with this case. If this court was going to allow that information to come up in this case, we were going to be going back and trying the case all over again. Although Benoit didn't seem to show any damage on the SmackDown tapings, those who saw him at the Stu Hart funeral said he was badly bruised on the side of his face, which looked to be where the landing was from the bad bump in the A-Train match at No Mercy. Jeff Hardy came to the Raw show in Fayetteville. He's working non-stop on his music to get ready for a concert somewhere near Cincinnati on November 21st. Contrary to some reports, there are no talks whatsoever regarding him coming back. Not that in this business, they couldn't start at any time and the door is shut. Because I doubt that's the case either. Mac's evaluation by Dr. James Andrews is that he needs reconstructive knee surgery for a torn posterior cruciate ligament, so he's out 4 to 6 months. Kenzo Suzuki will be offered a developmental deal. Suzuki quit WJ after the way the death of Giant Ochiai was handled. He was not impressive at all in working for TNA and MLW before quitting WJ, and was turned down by both New Japan, where he started, and 01, and had been working in construction of late. Suzuki, 29, is 6'3.5" and 260 pounds, which is big for a Japanese guy and has a good look, but is considered in Japan to be their version of a Lex Luger, in that he looks like a star but can't get over and doesn't get it. He was a college star in rugby, who later became a member of the Japanese national team in that sport. He never watched pro wrestling as a kid, which is exceedingly rare for a Japanese pro wrestler, and actually got his start when he was shopping at a big man's specially tailored clothing store and bumped into Seiji Sakaguchi. Sakaguchi saw him and asked if he was an athlete, and he gave his background. Sakaguchi, when finding out his background, asked him if he'd like to join New Japan Pro Wrestling. He laughed at first, saying wrestling was fake and he had no interest. Sakaguchi then told him he could become both rich and famous if he was successful at it and had a great look. So he trained for it. Unlike most, who debut with little fanfare, he was scheduled to debut on January 4, 2000, at the Tokyo Dome against Goldberg in Goldberg's Japan debut. However, just before the match, Goldberg did that ill-advised angle where he punched through a window and nearly ended his career. The gimmick was that they wanted Goldberg to pin Suzuki, but start a rivalry between the two, leading to Suzuki being the first Japanese to beat Goldberg in a few years. Of course Suzuki never got over and Goldberg never did wrestle for New Japan, so there went those plans. Suzuki and Hiroshi Tanahashi were pushed as a Rock and Roll Express-like young tag team in New Japan, since Tanahashi was the company's best young worker and Suzuki had the look. Suzuki ended up quitting this year when WJ was formed out of loyalty to Riki Choshu. Alex Merves did a column this week on Lillian Garcia, after interviewing her when she sang God Bless America before the Dolphins-Patriots game on October 19. The 30-year-old Garcia is originally from Columbia, South Carolina, and was a fan of Flair and Andre as a child, but stopped watching wrestling before high school. She answered a WWE audition in 1999 looking for a new ring announcer, and did the ring announcing for a live Raw in Ames, Iowa just 20 minutes after being told she was on. She admitted she was terrible at first and fans booed her because she wasn't a trained ring announcer and didn't know who the guys were. She also talked about avoiding stripping like virtually all the other women except Stephanie that work on television. Everybody chooses what they want to do. I told them my background just is not like that. I don't mind being sexy, but my whole thing has been sexy classy. It's just something instilled in me. There's nothing wrong with it if anyone wants to be a little more risque. Maybe some people think me wearing a miniskirt is risque. From an interview in the Kitchener-Waterloo Record on October 28, when Angle was asked about the popularity drop, he said, "I would say things are better now than they were last year at this time. Every few years it becomes a phenomenon. It happened in the Hogan era. It happened in the Austin era. It happened in the Rock era, and somewhere along the line it's going to happen again hopefully when I'm still here." He put over the SmackDown brand as the show for the fan who likes to see good wrestling matches. After the worst business weekend that I can recall dating back to the Kevin Nash era as champion this past week, the fall in morale, even from last week, was said to have been noticeable at TV. One veteran wrestler said, "When we get to TV, they'll act as if everything is on course. That just hurts the morale because it gives us the feeling management is not acknowledging the problem, therefore, they can't fix it, since they are in denial." Buff Bagwell did an interview claiming he had been offered a job by Vince, but turned it down, saying the money wasn't enough after figuring in expenses, intimating it was for $100,000 per year. Internally, the story is very different. The claim is that Bagwell called once again recently, as he has done fairly often over the past year, asking about work, and was told there is no interest. It is said he hasn't even talked to Vince, but had only talked with talent relations. Heyman was actually suggesting others, John Cena and Bobby Heenan most prominently, when WWE contacted him for what looks to be a short-lived GM role. The current plan is for Stephanie to return at or around Survivor Series. Maybe he got an advanced copy of the script and saw that the role was to play an incompetent fool from day one. Roman, who did a week at OVW, will be working the November 11th SmackDown tapings in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Haas was very sick over the weekend but didn't miss any shows. In Augusta on October 27th, he was so bad off he was throwing up backstage. He worked his tag match with Benjamin against Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty, but Benjamin carried the match. Confidential was a rerun this week, replaying the show with the lead segment of the night they did the Raw and Nitro simulcast on March 26, 2001, and started the rapid decline of the industry. That latter part wasn't mentioned. It just seemed so weird watching the company praise itself for the worst booking botch job in history, such as Eric Bischoff talking about how he was glad the McMahons got it because at least that meant WCW would live. They are doing a big piece on Stu Hart next week. Michael Cole replaced Taz as announcer on Velocity working with Josh Matthews, and that change immediately took it from a very good announcing team to a lot of unintentional comedy. Matthews called Orlando Jordan, OJ, which isn't exactly the prime nickname I'd want these days. They had a hell of a match with the FBI versus Ultimo Dragon and Kidman and Mysterio. I spent the entire 10-minute match trying to figure out the flaws in Dragon style as to why he's been buried alive. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he was the best of the 6 in this match, so I couldn't find a clue. Matthews, who does work hard to know moves, cracked me up talking about a Dragon sleeper as a reverse Asahi, pronounced like the beer, DDT. The next experiment seems to be putting DeMott with Matthews. Confidential will be doing a segment on Stu Hart on November 1st. OVW notes from the October 25th TV show. Not up to the level of the recent shows. The best match on the show was the opener, which saw newcomer Standing Thunder, Wavell star from Stampede Wrestling, pin Mike Mondo. Mondo has great comedy potential because of his great facials. He looks like former midget star Little Bruiser, and isn't all that much bigger, in a Crash Holly sort of way. Thunder did your basic opening match spots, and hit all of them. Cornette must think highly of him, because he not only pinned Mondo, but laid out Morris and Kenny Bolin afterwards, and opened up Bolin's briefcase, revealing 2 bricks inside. Mark Magnus, who continues to carry himself like a star and said he was the next in the line after Thez, Flair, and Rock, did a promo where they announced he'd defend the OVW title next week against Nick Dinsmore. Chris Cage and Tank Tolan beat Nova and the Idol via DQ in a match that needed a lot of work again. Lucy interfered, but even with Lucy on his back, Tolan hit the Tank turret on Nova for the pin, but the ref called for a DQ for Lucy's interference instead of counting the pin, so Nova and Idol kept the tag titles. Conway gave a message to Cornette from John Laurinaitis. The storyline was that Laurinaitis went to Jim Ross and told him to drop OVW, but Ross refused. Conway sent that Laurinaitis is sending in his eyes and ears to OVW Inspector Max Impact, formerly Horseshoe. Well, he may not be ready to wrestle on TV, but he did a good job on his first interview in playing a big bully, which, in close, he can believably come off as. Conway also said he's gone as he's a WWE superstar now. Cornette said he has to give 2 weeks notice and that next week, he's facing Matt Morgan, which presumably will be Morgan's next big win over a WWE star. Maine saw Matt Capitelli and John Hennigan and Leviathan Batista over Bane and Seven and Bob Holly. Match was pretty bad, and it was definitely not Holly's fault, but the crowd loved it. Capitelli didn't look nearly as good as in his singles match with Holly, and the other 4 didn't look good either. Straight face win with Capitelli pinning Seven. Place went nuts for Leviathan again, and the girls love Capitelli. There are thoughts now, after the crowd reaction to the Heidenreich debut, of putting a lot of new faces from OVW on television just to see if anyone clicks right away. Actual paid attendance for the October 13th and Raw tapings in Pittsburgh was 7,800 and for the October 14th SmackDown tapings in Cincinnati was 5,300. Estimated attendance for the SmackDown taping in Albany, New York, on October 21st was 4,500. There were no house shows on October 24th or October 25th because of Stephanie's wedding. Raw crew on October 26th in Florence, South Carolina drew 2,000 paying $45,000. October 27th SmackDown in Albany, Georgia, paid 1,600 paying $45,000. October 28th SmackDown in Augusta, Georgia, drew 1,400 also paying $43,000. I believe those would be either the 3 lowest, or 3 of the 4 or 5 lowest house show gates for WWE events all year and all on the same weekend and involving both crews. October 28th Raw in Fayetteville drew an estimated 6,000. In Florence, main event was RVD pinning Jericho with a frog splash after a series of ref bumps. They opened the show with Bischoff putting over Orton, leading to Booker versus Orton. Booker won, and then Bischoff said he was mistaken. It was a 2 out of 3 fall match. Booker then won the second fall. OVW's Disciples of Sin, who are nowhere close to ready, and both have been around long enough that they may never be ready, worked the show against Hurricane and Rosie in what was reported as a bad match. In Albany, Georgia, Maine was Lesnar over Benoit in what we heard was a very good match. Finish saw a ref bump, missing Lesnar tapping to the crossface. A-Train, who hadn't worked the undercard, then laid out Benoit to allow Lesnar to win. Bassams beat Guerreros to keep the tag titles, and they had Chavo walk out on Eddie after a post-match fight. Plus Mysterio over Cena match with Mysterio winning via clean pin. Matt Capitelli and John Hennigan from OVW were brought in to work with Horseshoe and O'Hare. Horseshoe isn't even ready for OVW TV, let alone WWE, and he looked bad. Hennigan, who has a good look for teenage girls, really isn't ready either. People have forgotten about them from Tough Enough and some thought they were Spanky and Richards. Hennigan really does resemble Richards a lot, except he looks more like his little brother than him. So in other words, this match wasn't ready. In Augusta, Lesnar pinned Benoit in what was called a pay-per-view main event caliber match. This time A-Train's interference led to an F5, but Benoit kicked out. Lesnar reversed a back suplex into a second F5 and got the clean pin. There was actually an unplanned shoot result on the show. In the bikini contest with Sable, Dawn Marie, and Wilson, the fans usually vote for Wilson because Sable goes heel. Well, even though Dawn worked as the heel, she got more response than the other two to the point it was acknowledged and she was declared the winner. FBI have been getting strong reviews as a trio on the road with Spanky and Jordan, London.